We want to welcome everybody. Special edition of Iowa Live with former Iowa assistant coach Don Patterson. Don was had the privilege of going to a Western Illinois State game. Don, before we talk Hawkeyes, how did the trip go for you and your wife? And I saw Western Illinois got the win.
It was a wonderful trip, Corey. Thank you for asking. Bear with me. It's just a day trip to Macomb. It's only a 2-hour drive. So we had a chance to reconnect with a lot of old friends. And it was just a wonderful day. It was a great game. It was really hotly contested. Both teams were really working hard to gain an edge. And in the end, it was a 38-31 final.
So you and I talked about who you were rooting for in that game. You've got some connections to Illinois State, but of course you coached at Western Illinois. So how were you feeling late in that game?
Conflicted, to say the least. I told Jared before the game, Jared Elliott being the coach at Western, I said, Jared, I think you know this. I've known Brock Speck since he was a high school senior. He's the coach at Illinois State. And I said, and my problem is I don't want either one of you to lose. So I'm guaranteed a win, but I'm also guaranteed a loss today because I got friends on both sides. But I was really happy for Jared. It's been an uphill battle for him, and it's a good win over Illinois State because that's kind of the bragging rights, if you will, of Central Illinois. That's a long and good rivalry, very evenly matched teams, and for now, Western has the bragging rights.
How long is the trip there to Macomb, Don, from Iowa City?
It's just 2 hours. 2 hours, you go down through Burlington. We go the back way, as we say. So once you get to Burlington, you do cut off a little bit of distance if you don't mind driving on some 2-lane roads. And we know the roads well enough, it's not a problem. So that's how it works for us.
Well, we're happy you're back with us. I know you've had a chance to look at Iowa, Wisconsin on tape. A lot to unravel, and I want to spend a lot of this time. You know, we spent over 2 hours yesterday with our listeners just talking about how putrid of an offensive performance. Maybe that word is too strong, but certainly the offense is struggling. I know Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register, he had the tweet of the day yesterday. He stated very simply when the game went final, he said, Iowa's offense is broken. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. They rank last in the Power 5 in total offense. Don, what is going on right now with Brian Ferentz's unit?
I think they don't have a logical solution in mind. In their defense, Purdue's defense is certainly above average. And, of course, Wisconsin's is certainly one of the best. So it's not shocking that we would struggle against the Badgers. The disappointment I probably share with you, Corey, is that it didn't look like we made much of an effort to change. I knew going into the game, and as you know, if I have some awareness, I'm going to always share it with the people that I'm close to in coaching. And I knew there was a huge priority on winning to begin the game, winning the first quarter as an example. If you looked at, I looked at Wisconsin, all 7 games the Badgers had played, and I looked at all the 25 top parameters, and there was only one that was 100% reliable in predicting the winner, and that was the team that won the first quarter. So obviously it was important to win the first quarter. And it didn't shock me that Wisconsin won that quarter. They only won it 7-0. But what was disappointing is it didn't seem as if in the first quarter we really were very aggressive at all in trying to win the first quarter. That was the disappointment I had. And part of the problem, of course, is we're nervous about certain pass plays because we're not sure we can protect well enough to get the ball out without being sacked. But part of that solution, of course, is to throw more play action on early downs. That gives you a better chance to be able to have the time you need to get the ball down the field. And that would logically would have been a good alternative because the way the Badgers have played rush defense all year, it would suggest we're kind of butting our heads against the wall to run the ball anyway. Obviously, we have to try to do that because we got to try to keep them honest. But in the meantime, of course, what's wrong, especially before they know what our plan might be, what's wrong with going with some play action passes early? I was disappointed we didn't get that done. And The Badgers' defense is outstanding. They're going to make a lot of offenses look bad. And sad to say, we're one of those that now falls into that category.
And I just got this news. I don't want to totally shift gears, but the Rod Farva lets us know that Gary Patterson has been relieved of his duties at TCU. Don, you're not related to Gary, are you?
We are not. I actually have a younger brother named Gary, and he's been known to, when somebody suggested he was the coach at TCU, he wouldn't necessarily argue with them. So he played along a time or two through the years. No relation. I do know Gary, not very well, but one of my second cousins was a quarterback for TCU years ago when they were really good. He's a really successful lawyer and has given TCU a lot of money through the years. And I'll have to check with him to see how he feels about it. I can understand, Gary Patterson's been in that position a long time. And it certainly wasn't something that a lot of the loyal fans wanted to do, is to replace him. But obviously there's enough sentiment now where they felt like they had to.
The real Hayden, and he means TCU. He says, does TCU have higher standards than us? Gary Patterson has had a lot of success there, Don. I think back to the Andy Dalton year in the Rose Bowl and of course, their transition to the Big 12. Are you at all surprised by that move by the Horned Frogs program?
I'm a little surprised because he's been on his job almost as long as Kirk has been here, I think. I believe Gary's been the coach now for something over 20 years, I believe. I'm not sure of that. And in that regard, you think he's certainly got a loyal following within the TCU alums, because he's put together a lot of good seasons through the years. He's certainly got a winning record over his entire career. But of course, in football, as in athletics in general, the question is always, what have you done for me lately? And that's the problem. I'm sure that's one reason they made a change.
All right, back to Iowa. This is an Iowa Live show. You talked about getting off to a quick start, and that was the first question. You brought it up to me last night when I texted you after the game. And well, actually, it was later in the evening, but you asked, because you hadn't seen the game yet, did Iowa attempt to get the ball downfield early? I told you in my response, I said, if they did, I missed it. Now, maybe protection broke down, Petrus missed guys. You watched the game back, Don. Did Iowa take chances and we just missed them because of other circumstances that were out of, Petrus' control?
No, I after looking at the game, of course, I only looked at the TV version of the game, but it doesn't appear that we took any shots downfield, even planned to have any shots downfield. Most of the balls that were thrown were of the short, quick variety of throws, and of course we were off target on any number of those, and that left us with Spencer finished with a little less than 5 yards per attempt, and of course that's not good enough. We got to be able to do better than that.
Don, that was the one parameter that was 100%. Right, and I think I can say that now, given the game is in our rearview mirror. Wisconsin, right. You lose, and it's not like they're not like they're Alabama and they were 7-0 heading into this game. They were 4-3, and my understanding of that parameter, Don, is the analytics say that in the 4 wins that Wisconsin had, they won the first quarter. In their 3 losses, they lost the first quarter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So certainly Iowa did not get out to a quick start. 1 first down in the first half, 0 first downs in the first quarter.
Right.
20-0 at halftime. Third quarter, there was some life. It seemed like, it was 20-7. Iowa had a nice drive. It was 20-7, and it felt like at 20-7, Iowa was driving into Wisconsin territory. And a lot of people were upset yesterday, Don, by the fullback call on 4th and 1. I was not terribly upset about it because I'm not an offensive coordinator, but I looked at it and I said, man, I don't know what I would have called. Don, would you have? I know it's hindsight, but I'm not asking you to second guess Brian, but what would you have called in that situation if you were in that position?
Well, when you look at the game situation, it's 20-7. I've got it written down here. 3rd and 2 on the +41. There was 4 minutes left in the third quarter, roughly. And we ran the fullback dive for 1 yard. That was against a 9-man front. It was a heavy, heavy front. They were daring us to throw the ball. They had press coverage on our one outside receiver that was in the lineup, and they had a free safety back, playing center field, so to speak. So we ran the fullback for 1 yard, and then, of course, ran the fullback again versus the same kind of 9-man front, and fell. I don't know that we got a very good spot, but that's part of the risk you take, of course, when you run into a pile of bodies. Honestly, I was thinking this way as I saw it. Even if we convert on 3rd and 2, we're the same team that's been struggling to make first downs. So if you want to talk about an opportunity for a chunk play, then an ideal opportunity would have been 3rd and 2 on the plus 41. And what we needed was a 41-yard touchdown. That's what we needed, because we were still 2 scores down. And, of course, we're late in the third quarter. There's only 19 minutes left in the game. So we need to find a way to get a chunk play. And the argument for running play action on 3rd down is you still got 4th down anyway. So let's face it, 4th and 2 is not much different than 4th and 1. And so one logical thought would be go play action on 3rd and 2. And if you hit it, great. And if you don't, you still got 4th down. And again, the better chance, I think, against a team like Wisconsin is to spread the field a little bit. I'm not talking about going empty. That would be lunacy, of course, because we're not going to ask Spencer to run the ball out of an empty set. But nothing wrong with maybe getting into a spread formation and having Tyler in the backfield, and then running any play in our offense, really. Everything from a short throw for a first down to some kind of play that at least spreads them out. The formation spreads them out a little bit, and maybe it's a quick hitter, and it kind of depends on what's worked up until then. Maybe that's a call for you on 4th and 2. But even when we're talking about 4th and 2, we're assuming we didn't hit on 3rd and 2. I'd like to think with play action, we would have hit something big on 3rd and 2. And I realized maybe the percentage is only 30%. Well, my gosh, we're 2 scores down. I believe I'd roll the dice even if it was 30% on 3rd and 2, because I'm going to turn around and go for it on 4th down anyway.
Right. Don, there was a 2nd and 1, and I don't know if it was first quarter. I think it was first quarter. There was a 2nd and 1. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was second. I don't know. Doesn't matter. There was a 2nd and 1 in the first half, Don. And I looked at my brother who I was watching the game with, and I said, you take a shot here. You take a shot here. Handoff. And up until that point, they hadn't taken any shots. And I guess, and I know it's so easy to look at plays in hindsight, but I believe they got a first down on that run play. But I guess those are the plays that bother me the most, Don, because as far as being opportunistic with your shots down the field, isn't 2nd and 1 like the perfect opportunity to line up and go play action deep?
Yes, that's a good opportunity.
Did you feel the same thing? Do you remember the play that I'm talking about? Because there weren't very many 2nd and short yardage situations in the game. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Are you sure it was maybe not in the first half, but sometime second half? I'm thinking
it could have been third quarter. I just remember a 2nd and 1, and it was one of the few 2nd and 1s they had in the game.
I believe it was third quarter. The only reason I say that is we only had the one first down at the end of the half, and that one I believe came pretty late in the half, as I recall. A couple of minutes left in the half. Yeah, that's an ideal time. One of the things you always look for. Put it this way: if I'm a head coach and I'm scouting another team, one of the things I want the defensive staff to know for sure is how often do they use waste downs. And the reason I want to know that, if they use them a lot, then for God's sakes, there's no excuse for us being fooled on a waste down. Then you expect play action, you expect them to try to get a big play, and you're ready for it. You're not going to take the bait. Other teams hardly ever use a waste down, and that's fine too, because now you can load up and anticipate them simply to try to make that first down. But in general, a lot of smart football teams use waste downs, and you better be prepared for that opponent to do the same thing.
Paul Hoffer, could they finish 6-6? I know we're all pushing the panic button. I still don't think that's going to happen. I get people are frustrated. Northwestern's not a good football team right now, Don. I mean, they are just, every time I think Patty Fitz is going to figure out a way to get that thing on track, it just seems to fall off even deeper. Again, we can talk about Northwestern later in the year, but later in the night, but what is your outlook right now for this offense? How much improvement can be made? I know there's limited amount of improvement that can really be made mid-season with the O-line. Is this where are you at right now as far as your outlook these next 4 games, these final 4 games?
Well, sometimes I quote Bill Brazier, our old defensive coordinator, and Bill one time said, "You're never as bad as you think you are, and you're never as good as you think you are either." And right now, there are some fans that think we're not very good, but they're wrong. We're actually better than that. We just simply ran into a buzzsaw in Wisconsin, and we didn't help our cause as much as we might have. And that relates to, taking chances to make big plays, things like that. But the good news is, I think we are a better football team than Northwestern. I'm certainly confident we'll be able to prove that next Saturday night. Not saying it's going to come easy, because Fitz is a really good coach, and Northwestern delights in beating Iowa. There's no doubt about that. I don't know if the listeners are aware, but Coach Fitz actually broke his leg against Iowa years ago, and I think he still holds it against us a little bit, that he had a really serious injury against the Hawkeyes. But at any rate, I fully expect that we'll beat Northwestern, and it may not come easy, but I still think we'll find a way to do it. And then 1 week later, let me get my game straight. We get the Gophers, don't we, 1 week later? That'll be a challenge because they're playing well. But the good news is, just as Purdue seems to own Iowa, we seem to own Minnesota. Has PJ ever beaten Kirk? I don't think so. You can look that up. I know it hadn't happened often. I'm not sure it's happened at all. So it'll be a tough game because the Gophers have a lot to play for. They're going to be highly motivated, and yet we're right back here at Kinnick, and our football team has great pride, and certainly they're going to prepare like they always do, regardless of what happens against Northwestern. We're going to prepare, and we're going to fight like hell to find a way to beat the Gophers. So I really acknowledge that'll be a difficult game because they have so much to play for. They will be highly motivated to win the game, regardless of the struggles they might have had against recent years. And then beyond that, of course, you've got Illinois at home, at our place, I should say. And I have great confidence we'll beat the Illini because they have maybe more injury issues than we do at this point. And obviously they don't have great talent. They managed to get a great win against Penn State. And incidentally, I wasn't surprised that Penn State played the heck out of Ohio State. I could see that coming because Penn State has pride too. And so they bounced back with a really good effort. So the bottom line, these last 4 games, the 2 I'm most worried about would be the Gophers and the Cornhuskers over in Lincoln. That one concerns me because that offense, they always have a way of self-destructing, it seems. It happened again, right? Purdue beat them, but it was a struggle. I haven't seen the numbers from that game, but I do know this. They're one of the few teams in the country that's averaging maybe 225 a game rush and 250 pass. They're averaging certainly something over 450 yards total offense per game. Without turnovers, of course, they'd be sitting pretty. And they've actually improved on defense. So that'll be a struggle. I don't care what anybody says. It will not be easy to win in Lincoln. But again, I like our chances. If we're measuring character and commitment and mental toughness, I'd put our team up against anyone. And for those reasons, I think we have a chance to win all 4 of them. I readily acknowledge maybe we'll stub our toe. But I think the other team's going to have to play well to cause us to do that because I think our guys are highly motivated. And in their minds, 10-2 certainly sounds a lot better than 9-3 or 8-4. Corey, I've lost you. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now, Don?
Yes.
Apologize. That was my fault. this is my opinion, and this certainly, I mean, we don't know this. I think 10-2 will win the West. A lot of Iowa fans still, or at this point, are thinking the West is out of reach. It's over. We blew it. I think 10-2 will win the West, and let me tell you why. Purdue's going to lose again. If you look at their schedule, they will lose again. All right. If Iowa beats Minnesota, they'll have the head-to-head against Minnesota, and they'll have the same Big Ten record, assuming Minnesota doesn't lose again. But even if they win out and Iowa beats them, they'll have the same record as Iowa. So all Iowa would need really is for Wisconsin to lose again. Now, that may not happen, but they do get Minnesota the last week of the season. So I believe there's a good chance 10-2 will still win the West, Don. What are your thoughts?
Let me get this straight. You're banking on us beating Minnesota, giving them, that would just be their second loss, right?
Right.
Yeah. So they'd have 2 losses. And, of course, we're banking on Minnesota beating Wisconsin,
Correct.
which certainly might happen. And, of course, we have to win out, too. That would give us, and, of course, Purdue has to lose another game, which we certainly expect will happen in Columbus. I believe they have to go to Columbus.
Yeah, I believe
so. That would leave us with a 3-way tie, and we would have all beaten each other. Is that right?
No. Because Purdue is at 2 losses right now. So
right.
Purdue loses again, they'll be out of the mix. And you said 3-way tie. Wisconsin, let me look at think about this. Wisconsin, how many losses does Wisconsin have? They have 2 Big Ten losses, correct?
They do.
So another loss to Minnesota would make it a 2-way tie at the top between Minnesota and Iowa. So one more loss for Wisconsin would put Wisconsin out of the mix, assuming Iowa wins out.
You said another loss to Wisconsin. Or, I'm sorry.
If Wisconsin loses again, which we're assuming they lose to Minnesota.
Okay, and you're counting on us beating Minnesota, of course.
Right. We've got to win out. We have to win out at this point.
You're right. That would give them a 3rd loss. You're exactly right. At that point, we would only have
over.
We would just have a 2-way tie.
And we would have the tiebreaker because we'd have beaten Minnesota.
That is a scenario that's entirely possible.
Absolutely.
So
the sky is not. Look, if the offense doesn't improve, it's probably not going to happen because you're probably not going to win out, Don. I mean, Minnesota's hot right now. I know they struggle with Nebraska, but honestly, everybody's struggling with Nebraska. Michigan struggled with Nebraska. That's why Nebraska's so dangerous, as you brought up. Yep. But I honestly do believe that Minnesota, like you said, Iowa's had Minnesota's number, and we're also assuming that Wisconsin's going to beat Rutgers this weekend, which probably will happen, but Rutgers won this past weekend, right? I mean, Rutgers is not Rutgers of the previous era. Shiano's at least got them with a different mindset. I think they're winning some games, which they used to never win at all. So I do think that Wisconsin is going to lose again. I wouldn't put money on it, but chances are they do. And so Iowa's just got to focus one game at a time, like you brought up. Now, Sam Kim asks a question here, Don. I'll make this bigger so you can read it. A limited QB, limited play sheet. What does Ferentz change, Coach? So I know that's a loaded question because you can take a lot of different ways, but certainly specifically towards the quarterback and the playbook, what does Iowa do to turn this offense around?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is you got to for sure have the mentality that you got to play to win. So you got to take shots. And I'm not talking about just throwing the ball up for grabs. I'm talking about calculated shots. And the prime example I can think of that you're familiar with is our touchdown pass at the end of the Penn State game. That was a well-conceived play that was well executed, and it ended up being the winning touchdown. So, the challenge for our coaches is be able to come up with, just to pick a number out of a hat, I'd say be able to come up with 4 of those plays every week. 4 plays that have a chance for a big gainer. And the defense has no idea when those 4 plays might show up. But if we need all 4 of them, then let's call all 4 of them. And let's not waste them. We talked about this before, Corey. Maybe it needs to be against a zone look and not a man look. You don't want to take those kind of throws maybe against a pressure snap. So you simply school the quarterback. If you think you got pressure, then you got to get out of the play. Save the play. We'll turn around and call it again. And as I mentioned before, I don't know that we've ever had to call one more than twice. Usually we guess right the first time. And we run it the first time we call it. And typically, if you talk to the players from years ago, they would tell you most of those plays seem to work. And it's not a shock to me because it looked good on a chalkboard. It looked good on video. And if we can execute, and that's where the preparation comes in, if we can execute the play, you've already got the element of surprise, because they haven't seen you run that play. It's a play maybe that was devised for that particular game based on what you've seen on video. And when you call it, you got a pretty good chance to execute it and hit on it. And as I mentioned before, if you call 4 of them in a game, even if you only hit on 1 out of 4, maybe that's the game-winning touchdown. That's what you could certainly say happened in the Penn State game. So just for the record, though, what if you hit on 2 of them? Well, maybe they're both touchdowns. Or if not, they're certainly chunk plays. They're big gainers that flip the field. And that's what you need, of course, is to here's what I know about defenses. Any defensive coach will tell you this, especially if you get fooled a little bit with the play and it's a big gainer, that just really tears your heart out, as far as a defense goes. It's demoralizing because you fought so hard to prevent your opponent from moving down the field, and all of a sudden on one snap, they picked up 40 yards. And it's demoralizing to let that happen, of course. So it energizes your team, and at the same time, it demoralizes the other team.
Don Sam Kim, critical of your comment because he says that Petrus rarely makes precise passes. So, and that's, of course, been a topic that a lot of people have raised over the past 24 hours. And I guess that leads into a question that I want to ask you. And certainly we've talked about it, but is there a quarterback controversy right now? Are you at a point now with the struggling offensive line where you would give at least the idea of Alex Padilla is mobile? If we can't protect Spencer, he's just a sitting duck. So maybe we give Alex an opportunity because he is mobile and perhaps he can make something happen with his feet when the pocket closes fast.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because, honest to God, the quarterback at Western Illinois, I looked him up after the game because Western didn't do a great job of protecting him. But here's what he was able to do. First off, he's a really accomplished passer. He throws a really nice, tight football. And the rest of the story is he's got really good escapability. And when he does buy time, escape in the pocket, he's not just pulling the ball down and running with it blindly down the field. He's looking for receivers that are working to get open. And they hit on any number of plays in that regard. So my point is I looked him up after the game, and I just wanted to congratulate him for how he played. And I don't know that he even had any idea who I was until I introduced myself. I said I used to be there are some pictures up on the wall in the locker room that I think for that reason they probably have an idea that I'm one of the old coaches because they have a picture up on the wall in the locker room. So I introduced myself to him, and I said, I want to congratulate you for how you played. And I just want you to know this. He is a senior. I said, I've coached college football 37 years, and I used to coach quarterbacks. And I'm here to tell you, somebody's going to bring you to camp. Talking about NFL. Somebody's going to bring you to an NFL camp, and you know what? You're good enough to make a team. That's the honest to God's truth. And I said, I'll tell you why. It's because you know how to spin the ball, and by that I mean throw with great accuracy and with good velocity. He's got a good, strong arm just like Spencer does. But frankly, his balls are more on target than Spencer's. Did I lose you? No, you're back. And the other thing, the big difference, of course, is that he has really good escapability. And, of course, the NFL, they don't want a guy that is destined to failure in the pocket either. They want a guy that can – it depends on who you are. Of course, Tom Brady, we know Tom Brady's not going to run for a lot of yards, and they're going to pay a premium to protect him. But there are other quarterbacks, of course, that are athletic and that can pull the ball down and still make something out of nothing. So, that's a quarterback for Western Illinois that was able to get that done. And I firmly believe he may make an NFL team. That's how good he is. The reason I bring it up, I could sit here wishing he could take snaps for us because I think he would be a really worthy competitor to Spencer. And in part because he'd have a different set of skills. He'd be a different type of quarterback. And I always did like the idea of the starter and the backup having different strengths and weaknesses because that makes you harder to prepare for, especially if you have already shown a tendency to play a second quarterback. So you have to spend time preparing for both of them and recognize that the calls on defense should be different to be able to defend the the strengths and weaknesses of that individual quarterback.
Don, what did you see from Alex on that last drive? Obviously, it was a small sample size, but I can give you my opinion on what's going to happen as far as a choice at quarterback moving forward. My opinion is very simple. It's Spencer Petras because it just is, and that's not necessarily what I'm saying I want, but it will be Spencer Petras starting against Northwestern. But from what you saw, did Alex show enough during the game, during that fourth quarter, to where you possibly throw him in for a series and see what he can do this next week?
That's a tough one. Alex did get 2 possessions, as you recall. And what we don't know, because we're not that familiar with the Wisconsin roster, I'm pretty sure at that point in the game he was going against a few backups too. So I don't know that he saw the best Wisconsin defense, that the same one that Spencer saw throughout the game. But I will say this for Alex. To me, he looked decisive. He wasn't hesitant. And he did give up a couple of sacks, as I recall, 2, I believe. But obviously, we had some shaky performances by some pass protectors at that point. So it really wasn't on him. You know, they were on him in a hurry. And at least he didn't cough the ball up, anything like that. But he did make some nice throws as the game played out. And you could argue that's still garbage time, but it counts for a little bit simply because at least this time he's on the field and he's going to do more than just hand the ball off, which is, of course, the bulk of the snaps he's ever had since he's been at Iowa. This time, of course, he had a green light to throw. He threw 6 passes. He completed 3. And the good reason that you could call that some kind of test is because Wisconsin certainly expected that he would throw. So they were in pass defense mode, whoever they had on the field. I think they had primarily starters still, but maybe they subbed here and there. I'm not sure. But the bottom line, he was put in a situation where he needed to throw, and they knew he needed to throw, and he still executed okay. 3 for 6 was not all bad. And I'm at least excited about the fact that he's got more game experience now. And I certainly don't think he'll start against Northwestern. You bring up a good point. Would there be anything wrong to insert him maybe for a random drive in the middle of the second quarter just to see what he could do? And again, get him some experience when the game's in doubt. That would be an option. I doubt that that'll happen, honestly. I think Spencer, in the eyes of the coaching staff, has won the job and hadn't done anything yet to lose it. And I know the fans might argue that point, but as you've heard me say before, if a quarterback struggles, part of that's on him, but part of that also relates to the other 10 guys. And that's certainly the case at Iowa.
Don, why are we throwing the ball away on 4th and 11?
I have no explanation for why we would do that.
That happened in the fourth quarter, and I kind of sounded off about it. I've come to Spencer's defense on many occasions, and certainly Spencer is not the only issue. He's probably not the biggest issue right now, but that was sort of a microcosm of some of my complaints with Spencer. His lack of understanding of time and place on the field, and lack of understanding of what down it is. You know, we think back to the Iowa State game and repeatedly taking sacks in field goal range that push you out of field goal range. He's had this issue with throwing the ball away, on 3rd and long or especially 4th down. Didn't make any sense, but he did that on Saturday against Wisconsin. And I'm assuming he was throwing it away because it was 20 feet out of bounds.
And that was his last snap, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. All I can think of course, does the field position matter at that point? We're already down 27-7. You could argue, and I remember vividly this happening in a game at Western Illinois. We were playing against Northern Iowa, and we were down on the 5-yard line. It was 4th and goal at the 5. We had an all Big Ten, an all-conference quarterback by the name of Russ Mickna. He did play in the NFL for a while, and he should have played a long time. That's another story. But anyway, here's my point. 4th and goal at the 5, and we needed to go for a touchdown. And so it was a movement pass, and Russ had to reverse his field. And now, as you can imagine, instead of being on the 10-yard line, he reverses his field. Now he's back on the 20-yard line. But this much I knew, and the same could be said for our running back, who was actually in the backfield. You could see it happen. Russ is going to buy a lot of time because he's a good athlete and he's running around. And then it occurs to our running back, I know what's going to happen. One way or the other, Russ Mickton is going to get the ball into the end zone. I don't care if he has to throw it over his head. He may not even have any idea where it's going, but he knows this. I'm not going to get tackled with the football because if I do, then we got to give the ball up anyway. So I'm going to find a way to put it in the end zone. That's exactly what happened. All of a sudden, you see our running back realize it's fourth down. Russ will not get tackled with the ball. He may do it under a lot of duress, but he's going to find a way to get the ball in the end zone. As Russ Mickton lets go of the ball, a Northern Iowa player is on one leg. He's still standing tall, a little bit like Stanley did in that Ohio State game. And sure enough, he throws the ball into the back of the end zone. And our running back, who had to sprint to get there because he realized he was actually in the backfield shortly before that point. So he had to sprint to get to the end zone to wait for that ball that was coming down because he knew Russ is not going to get tackled with the football because they both thoroughly understood football. And that's the point. They both understood what was going to happen. And Russ made it happen by buying time and throwing the ball into great duress, and Travis was waiting for it to come down. So fun to see. And taking that to yesterday's game, your point is we're already down 20. If you have to throw it up for grabs, just throw it up for grabs so that one of our guys might get it.
And Don, if it was intercepted, it would actually been better than turning the ball over at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
There is no circumstance in where that's a good idea to throw the ball out of bounds. No circumstances, Don.
It's hard to imagine. I don't think there was a penalty on that series of downs. Possible. Maybe he was confused about the down. I wouldn't think so. I guess anything's possible. But your point is well taken. Maybe that had something to do with Padilla going in on the next series. But I do recall there was a shot on the bench of Coach Ferentz, Coach Kirk Ferentz, talking to Padilla. And, he was talking about what he was going to be doing when he went on the field on that next series.
And for the record, Kirk Ferentz said after the game that the move to put Padilla in the game was simply to protect Spencer's health. So, because I thought that as well, Don. I thought it was a little bit early for Kirk to do that. And so I was a little bit disappointed. Now, maybe that's just coach speak, Don, him saying that it was to protect Spencer. But again, I agree with you. I think Spencer's the starter against Northwestern. But if you think back to how 2014 went with C.J. Beathard and Jake Rudock, I recall the game at Pittsburgh. And Don, I don't know if you remember that game specifically or if you were still coaching at the time, but
I was coaching.
That game, I recall Iowa coming out of halftime. I believe CJ started the second half. And, of course, eventually he overtook Jake. I've always heard speculation that CJ was threatening to transfer, and that really, hurried the coaches along as far as making that change. But I just wonder if I don't see the harm in inserting Alex for a series. If he throws a pick, he throws a pick. I mean, it is what it is. But, Don, I always go back to, was it Chuck Hartley that was not a great practice player and yet performed in the game? I mean, desperate times come for desperate measures, and I don't know how desperate the measure is. I mean, he's the second quarterback on the roster. Why not give him a shot for a series?
Well, I told you the story, of course, as a head coach, reminding our assistants as we started the season, listen, you're the same person that didn't know for sure who the starter was 2 weeks ago, so do not be hesitant to put in the backup because sometimes you find out that the backup is the better player. And there's that term gamer. Some players seem to play better than they practice. Others practice better than they play. I believe I'd rather take the guys that play well on Saturday. Those are the ones I really like a lot. I prefer that they practice well all the time, but Rob Houtland's the guy that comes to mind. Rob Houtland was a money kicker. I don't know if he ever missed a field goal that mattered. I do take that back. I think he missed one earlier in that infamous 1-versus-2 game, I think. But when the game was on the line, we had great confidence that Rob would make it. And he made it that day, and he made a bunch of other game-winning kicks, too, at the end because he was – but on Tuesday, he wasn't very good. I remember jokingly saying, I'm glad we don't play on Tuesday because Rob Houtland would miss for sure. But he was really good on Saturday. It seemed like he always was aware the games were being played on Saturday, so that gave us a chance to have a really good kicker with a lot of confidence that he could perform under pressure.
John asks, would it entirely shock anyone if they won the last 4? I am cautious only because of that play calling and QB play. I am not, I mean, again, I said at the outset of the show, they win their last 4, which I think there's a chance they do that. I think there's a good chance to go to Indy to represent the West. But here's the deal, Don. How can anybody say we're confident with that right now, given the fact that Iowa's coming off 2 blowouts to unranked opponents?
Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't shock me at all if we won the last 4. On the other hand, just thinking back to yesterday, we had 2 unforced errors that resulted in 2 turnovers. When I say unforced, Wisconsin had nothing to do with it other than falling on the ball. And of course, the one that was really disappointing was our fumble on the exchange between the quarterback and the running back. Wouldn't you know it, we're on the 2-yard line at the time. And I personally, if I was a running back coach, I would not put Kelly Martin in the game. Maybe that wasn't his first appearance in the game. It probably wasn't, I guess. But I just think that's a tough spot to put a backup in on, is the 2-yard line. Go ahead. Tyler's proven to have the better ball security over the entire season. So even if you were planning on going with Iowa at that point, that's putting a lot of pressure on him because I believe he fumbled one other game back in the black zone too, I think. But anyway, the ball comes out, and that's one that our defense couldn't prevent from getting in the end zone. It was such a short drive, of course, that they really had very little chance to stop them. And the other one, of course, was the muffed punt. And the message there, I guess, Charlie Jones, one of the reasons I like Charlie, he's so sure-handed. But I guess the message to Max would simply be, Max, you're one play away. So I realize when you field punts every day of the week, you wonder if it really matters because you're the backup punt returner. But against the Badgers, it certainly mattered. And Max has good hands. My guess is he charts just about as well as Charlie in fielding punts. But the point is, even if you're fielding punts at 95%, if Charlie's at 98%, then you need to make up your mind you're going to somehow pass him up. Over the next 2 or 3 weeks of fielding punts, you're going to run off a string of 50 in a row that you field, and maybe you'll pass him up. My point is 95% is not good enough. If you can be 98%, then be at 98%, and you got to analyze why you drop everyone. That one, it wasn't a terribly windy day. There was a cover guy that was pretty nearby. Maybe that distracted him a little bit. But for whatever reason, the ball went right through his arms. And when you know it ended up in their hands. And I think we held them to a field goal that time, I think, didn't we? I know they had 10 points on 3 great field position opportunities.
You could be right on that, Don. All I know is I felt really bad for Max. I mean, obviously he botched it, but kid who has worked his tail off. And Don, let's not forget, Max Cooper's a super senior. He came back to be a part of something. He's dealt with injuries, and he didn't need to come back this year, and he did. And I just feel bad for the kid because I thought in the spring, maybe he would have a role on offense. And he is obviously so far down the depth chart. I mean, he's probably 6 or 7 right now as far as wide receivers are concerned.
Yeah, you're right. There's any number of guys ahead of him. The 2 freshmen are ahead of him, of course, and the veteran receivers are ahead of him. And there's another guy, I believe, number 29, maybe.
Jackson Ritter, right?
Yeah, I believe he's ahead of him too. So you're right. Poor Max is not likely to see much playing time at all on offense, and I'm sure he has been responsible with his punt return duties. It's unfortunate that it happened. It could have happened to Charlie. We'll never know. In that same situation, maybe that guy would have distracted Charlie, and maybe Charlie would have muffed it too. We don't know. Certainly, I want to be sure the listeners understand. I promise you, it matters a lot to Max that he not disappoint this football team, and I know he's disappointed. Probably relieved that it was a 20-point game. If it was a 1-score game, you can imagine he would have been probably even more distressed than he already is. But he is a really conscientious young man. And I got to believe, too, that hard work and commitment pays off. And we got 4 games left in the regular season, and then we got a bowl game to look forward to. I certainly hope that Mac have some big moments in one or more of these last 4 or 5 games.
Our lines are open, everybody. 860-499-3332, 888-978-3232 if you want to call in, ask a question, make a comment, and certainly venting is okay. We had a lot of that yesterday on the show, Don. So hopefully people have kind of calmed down a bit and enjoying their Sunday evening. John asks another question here, and I'll make this bigger again. But he says, what is the reasonable expectation for fans as far as Iowa football each year? He believes it should be contending for the West. That's what I believe, Don. To me, there's no reason to not expect Iowa to contend for the West 2 out of 3 years at the minimum. Right now, Iowa's not doing that. They've gone to the championship game one time since the division started. What was that, like back in 2011 or 12, something in there? What should fans expect? What should expectations be?
I think it's very realistic that we would contend for it every year and make it to Indianapolis every 2 or 3 years. I think that's entirely a realistic goal for us. I say that because Ohio State's not in the West. And you could argue that Penn State's not in the West either. And maybe if we had to butt heads in this side of the conference as those two, your odds would go down considerably. But the truth of it is, Wisconsin's got a better history of qualifying as a Western champion than we do, and better than anyone else, I guess.
So does Northwestern. Northwestern's ahead of Iowa in that category.
Right. I knew Northwestern was also ahead of us, but beyond that, those are the only two, right? I think we've had this championship, I believe, now for 10 years. I don't know what the breakdown is, but it must be maybe 5 for Wisconsin and 3 for Northwestern, and that leaves 1 for us and 1 for Nebraska. Back in the old days, when it was leaders and legends, Nebraska actually qualified 1 year, and wouldn't you know it, they played another team from the West, Wisconsin, who was in the other side of the bracket. That was Wisconsin, and Bo Pelini's Huskers got steamrolled. I think it was 70-21 or something. So anyway, your point's well taken. Isn't it realistic that we could compete for it every year?
Should be.
Is it unrealistic? I'd like to say it this way. I'd like to believe we could recruit young men and let them know, if you decide to play football for us for 4 or 5 years, you can have the expectation that you're going to be part of a team that earns its way to Indy at least once, if not twice, in your career. I think that's a realistic goal.
Pat O'Neill, he says, I've been an Iowa fan and followed them since the 50s. The last 2 games, our offense was as bad as it has ever been. Don, that might be hyperbole, or is Pat on to something?
Well, again, to me, you've always got to look at the opposition. That Wisconsin defense is number 1 in the country in rush defense. True. I think they're number 3 maybe in scoring defense, something like that. They're certainly in the top 5. I believe there may be 3. That is a very stingy defense. And for that matter, Purdue's defense is much improved. I don't know what the numbers were for Purdue, Nebraska, but as you know, Purdue went into Lincoln and beat them. It was a 1-score game. But they held Nebraska to 23 points, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 28-23. And again, that's a very explosive Nebraska offense. Nebraska's been shooting themselves in the foot with turnovers and penalties, those 2 things in particular. So it's a difficult offense to defend, and yet Purdue did a good job defending us, and they turned around just a little bit later and did a great job defending Nebraska. So my point is we've faced 2 pretty darn good defenses, and we haven't performed well against them. That's true. We should not nearly be satisfied with how we played. But the one thing you can count on out of Kirk and his coaches is, they're not happy. They're proud. They don't want to disappoint Iowa fans at all. And so they're going to go back to work, and they're going to try to clean things up as best they possibly can, and they have a wealth of experience to do it.
And Don, before we get to our caller who's on hold here, Pat O'Neill also asks, he says, please ask Don what Hayden would have called during that game. Don, I'm confident that Hayden would have taken some shots early and probably often to offset that loaded box. And that's just my naive thinking. What do you think, Don?
Absolutely. He would have. And my point is that, that we're back to that 3rd and 2 and then 4th and 1.
Yeah.
Even if we convert that, my gosh, first downs are hard to come by. So that's why I said we're down 2 scores. If we can get a chunk play on 3rd and 2, even if it's only 20% likely to happen, it's worth the risk because we can turn around and go for it on 4th down anyway. Hayden would have taken some shots, no doubt about it.
All right, let's get to our caller. Thank you for calling Iowa at the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hawkeye Howard.
Hawkeye Howard. You driving tonight, Hawkeye Howard?
No, today's my birthday, so I'm handing out candies to kids and enjoying my day off.
What did you think of that game? We didn't hear from you yesterday, did we?
I made a comment after the game, and yesterday was my anniversary, so I kind of listened to it a little bit, and when it was like 27-7, I'm like, okay, that's enough of that. So I kind of watched some of the highlights of it, and I wasn't impressed with the game, with the play calling, as everybody says, and they were outcoached again. Every year seems like Wisconsin outcoaches Ferentz and the rest of them. And my big question is, as everybody is, if we're all not happy with the play calling, and who would say it's time for going to another, like Brian Ferentz, his position, who would say he's out and someone else is in? That's my question, because Kurt Ferentz is not going to fire his son.
Correct.
So what do we do? Are we stuck into this until Kurt retires? So, and another thing I'm going to point out is every year it's like this. Every year it seems like the past few years we lose. We're always so short, but so close to that Big Ten championship game. It's getting to a point now. It's getting redundant. So it's time for a change somewhere. In the coaching staff, it's time. It's got to be done, because it's getting to a point where it's going to happen. Here we had a great season going. All of a sudden, the bottom drops out. It seems like, and you can all maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like we have our hopes up, and then boom, they get shattered. And they can't keep that throttle down. So maybe it's me being a super fan, or maybe I'm just accepting wanting too much.
The throttle was never down for this Iowa offense. Let's look back at Iowa, Indiana, Iowa State.
Yeah.
Even Iowa, Colorado State. The offense was never good. Iowa, Maryland, they scored in the 50s, but they needed 7 turnovers to get there. So the Iowa offense hasn't been good all year. I'm right there with you. And I don't want to put Don in this awkward position, but I'll comment on the staffing issues. I don't think it's fair to have a conversation about changes at this point because we're midseason. But I will say this, Hawkeye Howard. I think unless some changes are made, those conversations need to be had. Do I believe they'll be had? No, I don't, because I do believe Brian Ferentz will be the offensive coordinator until Kirk retires. That's just, I'm not saying that's what I want or I don't want, but I believe that will happen. But I do think that conversations like this should occur if this season derails like it right now. It appears like it could.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you 100%. And, so I don't want to put Don in any position to comment unless he wants to, but, I just firmly believe, I've always been skeptical of his current coaching style from the beginning, but I respect the man and I enjoy the Hawkeyes and I ride that train every day, every fall. And it seemed like we keep getting derailed, by one game or 2 games it's over and over. When do we say enough is enough? We don't have an AD who says, okay, guys, you need to do something. We're so close. What's going on here? We don't have an AD that will step up and say that, to my opinion.
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that.
But, and I just wanted to, come in and you guys doing great. I enjoy it, Don, I like these Sunday talks and But I just wanted to say again, what my frustration was, and say happy Halloween and go Hawks.
Appreciate it, Hawkeye Howard. Take care. We'll talk to you next week, hopefully after a win.
Yeah, I hope so. I got to drive next week, so
Okay.
I'll be listening to it on the radio.
Well, go Hawks, nevertheless. Thanks, Hawkeye Howard.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, Don. Again,
Let me mention for you.
Go ahead.
Let me mention one thing I wrote down because I'm sure the listeners feel this way too. I made this note at the time. Very explosive run by Keegan Johnson on the reverse. Gain of 12 on that play. Must get the ball to those that show they know what to do with it. Thinking specifically about Keegan. And then later in the game, we did throw a slant to him, and he did catch it, as I recall. Maybe we tried to get him the ball another time or two. So that mentality does exist within the coaching. And for that matter, obviously Spencer has a little bit to say about where the ball goes. And obviously Spencer understands too. The guys that are making plays for you, those are the ones you got to feed the ball to. And hopefully going forward, we'll always have somebody or several somebodies with a hot hand, and we'll do a good job of getting them the ball. Keegan showed that on Saturday, and of course, Arlen has shown it also in games. So the freshmen, I would imagine, are going to continue to play a more and more prominent role going forward, simply because we need to identify more playmakers than we can't have too many. I'll say it that way. And if a freshman can contribute, by all means, put him out there and find ways to get in the ball.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. And Don, I made a prediction Friday night. I said on this channel, my prediction for the Wisconsin game is we're going to see a lot of targets to Keegan Johnson. I do believe he led all receivers in targets, but I don't believe it was enough. And again, he's your best deep threat, and I don't think it's close right now. And I think, Don, maybe this is overreacting to a small sample size. I think he may be the best skill position player on this team, Don. Tyler Goodson maybe being the exception, Don, but he's just a freshman, and he looks like the real deal.
That reverse was impressive.
Yeah.
Because he was going to gain yards for sure, but he ran through a couple of tackles, and he wasn't too far away from scoring on that play, of course. And honestly, I did find myself wondering, in the case of Tyler, is he a little bit beaten up? It seemed like maybe he wasn't quite as capable of getting away from people as he was in some other games. That's difficult to measure. Maybe you can just give credit to Wisconsin for being that sound with their tackling. But I didn't see too many missed tackles on the part of Wisconsin, and Tyler seemed like he was having more difficulty making them miss than some of the other teams we played.
Bora Rem says, why haven't they found 5 starting offensive linemen? I mean, I think we're seeing why, because they don't have 5 they're real confident in, Don. And although you'd like to have 8 guys who are capable of playing, these are not 8 guys that are all performing well together.
I found myself wondering this, realizing we have a hard time finding 5 linemen that can all play winning football. It's way too late for this now, but let's just think back. Our All-American center started off playing defensive line. So I'm wondering, right. I found myself wondering, some of the D linemen that aren't playing that much right now, I wish we could have a do-over and be required maybe to move one of those D linemen into O-line even last spring. And I think it's entirely possible that one of those guys might be in our starting lineup now. And I don't even know who it would be. I'm not that familiar with the reserve D lineman, but it looks like we have more depth at D line than we do O line. And I say that realizing it's just a challenge for us right now to find 5 linemen that can go out there and play winning football against anybody and everybody. That's hard to do. We don't have that right now.
Well, Don, I tweeted out this earlier today. Let's remember that Iowa's class of 2021. Now you can kind of throw, I guess, class rankings out. It was a top 25 class nationally, according to most sources, but that 2021 class was one of the better recruiting classes that I can remember by the rankings. And it actually, the strongest position group was O-line, Don. You've got Michael Mislinski, who's a true freshman this year. We see Connor Colby, who was a 4-star kid. David Cobb was a 4-star kid. I'm missing at least one or two others. So it was a strong class. Now, somebody asked me on Twitter, well, then what's the problem? Well, these guys do take time to develop, Don. I don't think you can blame Connor Colby for having struggles. My question is, my follow-up to that is, okay, yes, we don't expect these 5 freshmen to just be ready to go. But my question is, why aren't there older guys behind them ready to go?
Yeah.
That would be my question. I'm not going to say, well, where are the freshmen? No, it's where are the juniors? Where are the seniors?
Yeah, I'm assuming we've had some defections over the last couple of years. I don't know that much about our depth from last year or the year before, but you're probably right. If you got that many young players that are being openly talked about for key roles, then that would suggest one or two things. Either you lost some players because of transfer, or you simply had, maybe it was injury related, but for whatever reason, the player hadn't developed as well as we would have hoped.
Okay, Pat O'Neill here. He says, John Huarte. Now, I don't know Notre Dame football, Don, but he says, maybe you remember this guy. He said he was not that great at practice, but as Era Pashigan saw something in him, and sure enough, Huarte won the Heisman. See, that's my lack of Notre Dame in college football awareness from, I'm assuming, years ago. Do you remember this example, Don?
Vaguely. I'm not sure the year. Coach Parsegan coached a long time ago. I wasn't even very old at the time, I think, maybe in the late 50s or something like that, early 60s. John Huart was his name, and I don't remember that much about him. It's entirely let's face it, the Heisman's a little bit political. Obviously, a guy from Notre Dame has pretty much nationwide appeal. So I don't doubt that a guy from Notre Dame, if they had a good season, that he might earn a few extra votes in part just because they're an independent, and maybe they can attract votes from all 4 sections of the country rather than just 1 or 2.
Robert says most of the things you're talking about refers to bad coaching. Stop sugarcoating things. We need to fire this coaching staff. I'm saying you do not. I'm not saying that there should or there shouldn't be changes made. I'm saying you don't make them during the middle of the season. You don't do what USC did, Don. I mean, I'm not asking you to say yes or no on any staff changes, but would you agree with that? You were a head coach. Did you fire coaches, assistant coaches during the middle of the season unless there was something egregious that happened?
No. Here's the truth of the matter. You've picked your staff, and it's understandable you might not be happy with 1 or more of them, but that's what leadership is. You spend time trying to modify their behavior so they become better coaches. That's your job, is to educate them and motivate them so that they strive to become a better coach and they aspire to please you. And if you need to mention that their job performance is in jeopardy or is being questioned, that's okay. That's fair. But you don't do it publicly. You don't embarrass them publicly. You let them know, I'm not happy with your job performance, and we still have 4 games left. And I hope you understand, I'm not nearly satisfied with the way this season's gone at your position, and I'm here to try to help you to become a better coach. So you need to cooperate with me. Let me know ways in which I can help you, because I don't want you to fail, because if you fail, that makes the entire program weaker. And I don't want your position group to be a weak link on this football team. I know you don't either. That's the proper conversation to have with the coach that's not performing as well as you hope. And after the season, if that performance doesn't change, then you're certainly within your rights then to encourage them to look elsewhere for employment. And I always thought it was terribly mean to an assistant coach simply to fire him. Typically, I would say, you know what, you don't have a long-term future here. So if I can help you to find another job, I'll be glad to do that. I don't want to embarrass you or your family, but it would behoove you to look for another job, because I can't see any scenario where you're going to remain with us. And I'll help you to get that next job, but it's not going to be here. I've had that conversation. That's an unpleasant conversation to have, but that's the life of a head coach. That's what you have to do.
The real Hayden says it doesn't matter if we win out. If Wisconsin wins out, we're not playing for the West. What are we playing for? We haven't even competed for the West in the last 6 years. I agree. I mean, the expectation should be West, especially when you're 6-0, Don. I know that's not maybe the mentality that the players should develop, but man, isn't it West or bust when you're 6-0 to start the season, Don, and you're number 2 in the country? If you can't even win your division, that's a disappointing season, is it not?
Absolutely. I think I made the comment when we were 6-0. If we don't win the West this year, then maybe we're never going to win it. It's as good an opportunity as we're ever going to have. And I realize we've stubbed our toe twice now, but I think it's entirely possible that we went out, and maybe 6-2. It'd be 9 games, wouldn't it? Maybe 7-2 is good enough. Yeah. It's entirely possible that it will be good enough.
And I'm not disagreeing with the real Hayden. He's right. Iowa doesn't control its own destiny. But the fact of the matter is Wisconsin would have to win out. So, and maybe they will. Maybe they will. Their schedule is not, death row. It certainly it's doable. But Iowa's schedule technically is doable as well. But certainly some changes need to be made. John Chaffin says, Goodson has developed a habit of running to the line and stopping. I wish he would just go. He does seem a bit indecisive at times, Don. But also I would say that he's looking for holes that just simply aren't there.
Right. Yeah, he's doing what feels right at that moment. I do understand where they're coming from. I think we even talked about it. Kelly Martin, I thought, was actually a little more likely, if there was really no good running lane, to just put his pads down and drive forward as best he could for maybe only a couple of yards, but that's still better than -2 or -4. And you could argue that there were times maybe where Tyler, instead of looking for a bigger play, should simply take what they give us and always have in the back of his head what down and distance we're dealing with. A simple example, if it's 2nd and 5 and you can put your head down and gain 3, then that's not a first down, but at least that's moving us in the right direction. You certainly don't want to have a minus play on 2nd and 5. So that comes to mind, but it's hard to know. One thing I can promise you is those players and coaches study the video very, very thoroughly, and I guarantee if it looks like maybe it was not the best decision on Tyler's part, Tyler's taking a hard look at that same video. Even better video than what we see on TV, and he's making some decisions, even though it's after the fact. It still gives him a better chance to be a better player the next time he goes out there. And I don't doubt for a second he's as conscientious as anybody we can find. He's trying to make the most of every last opportunity to carry the ball. And as he goes, he's still he's played a lot of football, but there's still more to be played, and he's conscientious, and he's going to continually drive to find a way to be a better running back. And it doesn't always show up because you got to have places to run. And, of course, it matters so much who those players are blocking for him to open up those running lanes and give him a better chance to get out the door.
Charles Harris makes an interesting comment. He says that he just rewatched the 2019 Iowa-Minnesota game, which was Tyler Goodson's first start. He didn't run like that then, but he was running behind Tristan Wirfs. And, of course, that line in general was a lot different. It wasn't just Wirfs. I don't know if Alaric Jackson played in that game. I'm sure he probably did. So, yeah, the line is a lot different. And I would think just from a mentality standpoint, that would affect any running back when you go from running behind maybe the best one of the best tackles who's now in the NFL to a couple guys Richmond and DeYoung, who've never played a snap at this level until this year.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
Okay, Springtime 0502. I called in yesterday. You asked a question about BF, Brian Ferentz, being fired. He points to Ohio State changing DCs after the Oregon game. He makes the same point with quarterback changes. Oklahoma went from Rattler to Williams. Alabama, Hurts to Tua. Why can't Iowa? He goes on to say Oklahoma from Rattler to Williams, and of course a national championship resulted from that change at Alabama. I understand 5-star, 5-star, but Iowa has 4-star to 4-star or high 3-star. the rankings don't mean much. I mean, obviously, Kirk is more. I don't want to use the word stubborn because, maybe he's right. We don't know, but this is not Nick Saban. Guys like Nick Saban or even, Bob Stoops is a good example. I'd have to look back at his track record at Oklahoma, but Kirk is certainly not one to want to change quarterbacks midseason. Don, if a guy has been declared the starter, you're basically guaranteed, barring an injury, that he's going to be the starter throughout.
Well, I think if he really falls on his face, there'll be a change made. But it's always hard to assign responsibility. I won't even say assign blame, assign responsibility to where the problem really is. Obviously, Spencer's no different than Tom Brady in one regard. If Spencer had great protection, Spencer would be playing better. There's no doubt about it. And I mentioned before, I've never coached a quarterback that enjoyed being hit, and Spencer doesn't either. It's a challenging job, especially if there are people up in your face. And I will give Wisconsin credit. Honest to God, as I looked at that game, and it took me about 5 hours to look at it today, the TV copy, because I was simply stopping it and backing it up and looking at the same play again. And that is a very difficult defensive front to pass protect against. And I say that because, as you know, they're basically, they refer to them as a 3-4 defense. You might call it a 5-2 defense, because they have a nose guard and they have defensive tackles and outside linebackers, and then, of course, inside linebackers. But what makes them so difficult, those outside linebackers, I don't think those guys rush any more than number 5 does. Number 5 may rush more. They bring him a lot. And for that matter, they might bring Sanborn too, the other inside linebacker. But the point is, even if you have an idea that 5 of them are coming, you don't know which 5. And that's difficult because now it means maybe an offensive tackle is taking a pass set against a guy that's not even rushing. And in the meantime, you're backseating up, having to block a linebacker that weighs 200. In the case of Chanel, what does he weigh? They claim 260. I don't know if he's that big, but he is a very athletic 250-something if he's not 260. That guy, I agree with the color guy. He might be the best player I've seen all season. He's a dynamic football player.
He's an All-American.
Yeah. And it's not just that they bring players that maybe you didn't expect to come. They also have all kinds of weave stunts up front. And we do some of those same things, but it makes it really, really challenging to pick up those 5 guys that are coming. Maybe there's only 4 coming. 3 of them are those 3 down guys, but the 4th one, he's certainly not necessarily an outside linebacker. He might be number 5, or he might be the other linebacker too.
Ed Rogers says Ohio State changed their defensive coordinator after 2 games. The real Hayden says TCU just fired Gary Patterson midseason. Why can't you make a change midseason, Corey? A lot of teams make changes in the season. OSU took away defensive play calling from their DC. Again, I just don't. To me, you wait, especially given the fact that we're this deep into the season. I mean, we're not even midseason. We're now on the final stretch of games, Don. We're at the final 4 games. And I'm trying to be careful, too, with what I say, but I'm just saying I'm very willing to have this conversation once the season's over. I just don't think it's wise to make that change midseason. Now, one could argue if Iowa chose to do that, they do have a play caller who happens to be on staff, who happens to be a position coach for the quarterback spot. So technically, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but I can't imagine a scenario. First of all, I can't imagine a scenario where Coach Kirk Ferentz is going to fire his own son in general. I especially can't foresee that mid-season. So in response to the real Hayden here, I guess it's a difference in opinions. I just don't think it's a good idea during the season. It is what it is. We're not going to see any. Say you rip those play calling responsibilities away from Brian and you give those to Ken. Do people on here really believe we're going to see some massive changes with this offense? There are issues up front with this line, with quarterback play. It's more than just play calling. So I just think if you're gonna do that. Can you hear me, Don?
Yeah, got you back.
I just think if you're going to do that, you do that after the season or before next season.
There are other things you can do that have, I think, more likely have a positive effect. Simple example, let's imagine that Brian remains the play caller. Well, one obvious thing that can happen in my mind would be Kirk simply says, Brian, we're going to spend time together this next week and get ready for Northwestern. And I just want to be sure that there's no doubt in your mind as to what I want you to be doing on Saturday. So let's put our heads together here. Maybe it's the entire staff that's doing it, not just the entire offensive staff, I should say. Maybe it's not just Brian and his dad. Maybe it's the entire offensive staff. We're gonna brainstorm here as an offensive staff, and we're gonna come up with some chunk plays that have a good chance to work against Northwestern. And we're not gonna have a conservative game plan. We're not gonna throw caution to the wind. We're gonna take make calculated decisions about plays that have a good chance to work. And furthermore, we're going to call them at all the right times, because this is unacceptable that we're having so much difficulty scoring points. Now that's a smart move on the part of any head coach. And I promise you, Kirk certainly has that capability of getting that done. So my point is, there are ways that a head coach can affect change without simply changing titles in midstream. And that kind of supports what you're saying, Corey. I don't think there's anything to be gained by making some kind of public statement about we have a new play caller this weekend. And I don't see any advantage to that. I think first off, it really shakes the confidence of the players maybe. And even if they wonder if maybe somebody else might do a better job of calling plays, they simply don't know how that might play out. So there's that uncertainty that goes with change. So the better change is just change from within. And by that, I mean, as a head coach, having a greater effect on what that call sheet looks like. And for that matter, most important, maybe during the game, reminding the play caller, I want you to take some shots here on this next series of downs. And as you mentioned, Corey, if one of them happens to be 2nd and 1 or 2nd and 2, that's a really good opportunity to try to make something big happen and yet still be able to convert on 3rd down.
Don, I was just laughing because I'm just imagining Kirk Ferentz announcing at his Tuesday press conference, we have a new play caller. I mean, that would just never happen.
Right.
And I'm not saying it should. I agree with you, Don. I think there's other things to be done. But again, that conversation can be had, but I just don't believe it's the time or the place to do so. Now, with that being said, I do feel obliged to read some of these comments because it's our listeners and our watchers that make this show happen. So here's a comment from a Buckeye fan. He says, I'm starting to understand your frustrations about the offensive play calling. A new OC is required at Iowa. Iowa made too many errors in the first half to have a chance in this game. Joe Welsh, Brian Ferentz needs to be fired, but it won't happen. Called an awful game, making the offense lackluster once again. The offense looks horrible, but they won't do anything to change. Mozart's Ghost comments on, how do you say that name again, that coach at Notre Dame, Don?
John Huart. Oh, the coach, you mean? Parsegan?
Parsegan, okay.
Parsegan.
So 1964, according to Mozart's Ghost. The Real Hayden says, this is year 5 of Brian Ferentz. I've seen enough. I don't need to see another 4 games of this. I understand. I totally understand where you're coming from. And that's where I will stick up for the fans who are calling for Brian to be fired now. And I'm not saying I agree with that, because, again, I don't, that it needs to happen right now. But I understand where fans are coming from, Don, because this isn't just an issue that's, all of a sudden we have an issue with the offense. This is consistent results in the lower tier of not only the Big Ten, but of the country in just total offense and offensive production. So I do see where fans are coming from on that. And I don't think, I think Kirk has to understand. I mean, he's not above criticism. Brian's certainly not above criticism. And to me, Brian should understand the criticism. He may not like it, but certainly it's understandable. Hyperlocal says, fire a coach midseason. It doesn't happen often, but if a coach's job is in jeopardy, he makes changes like a new QB. Roger Edwards says, won't win the West or playoffs with subpar offensive coordinators and non-mobile quarterbacks. Spaghetti Factory says, Bill Snyder rarely would change QBs too. Don, how many times do you remember Hayden Fry changing up quarterbacks voluntarily throughout a season?
Well, I do recall that season we played in the kickoff classic against Tennessee, I believe it was. Yeah, it was Tennessee. 1982 or 3. I can't remember the year. And we openly stated we're going to play 3 quarterbacks. They're all going to play 20 minutes. And Hayden was criticized, because in the eyes of the fans, he was treating it like it was an exhibition game, an NFL exhibition game, because you're going to play all 3. But it really did give us some insight into how they were going to play. The third quarterback, the guy who took the first snaps, you might argue was Bill's best guess as to who the starter was going to be. That was Dan McGuire. And then Tom Paholski followed suit in that middle 20 minutes. And then the last guy to play was a guy named Chuck Hartley. Chuck Hartley ended up being, I believe, a 2-time All Big Ten quarterback in his 4th and 5th years. And we lost the game that day in part because Chuck Hartley, if you might recall, you're not old enough to remember this, are you, Corey? But some of our listeners are. We were running an option play on the goal line. It was 4th down, and Chuck was a really smart guy, and he knew I'm not going to be able to score, so I'm going to pitch the ball on this option play because the pitch man certainly has a chance. But he pitched it a little bit late, and when you know it, a Tennessee guy took it 98 yards. And we lost the game, I think, on the strength of that play. I think it was a 1-score game, as I recall. And, of course, people said, oh, my God, I couldn't believe Hartley made such a terrible decision. But the truth of it is he was smart enough to know I'm not going to score. It is 4th down. I'm going to try to make a play. And the fact that it didn't work was still not an indication that he wasn't going to be the best quarterback, because one of the reasons he was the best quarterback is he was a very cerebral quarterback. And in that case, his awareness that he didn't want to get tackled with the ball went against us. In most situations, of course, it would have simply maybe gone to a pitch man that got tackled short of the goal line also. But anyway, it took Bill, I think, maybe another game or 2 to decide for sure that Chuck was the better guy. But he wanted to be sure that Dan McGuire was a very highly recruited guy. I don't know if we had 5-star rankings back then, but if we did, he was probably the highest rated quarterback we ever recruited. He had a cannon for an arm, but his brain was somewhat lacking compared to Chuck Hartley's. And believe me, you have to be a bright person to process everything that a quarterback has to do. And Chuck's wheels spin a lot faster than Dan's. That made him a better quarterback. He didn't have as strong an arm, but he could throw it with accuracy, and he was cool under fire. Some of the same things that made Chuck Long a really good quarterback and that made Matt Rogers a really good quarterback. I like to remind people Matt Rogers was a 2-time All Big Ten quarterback. And he didn't have the world's greatest arm, but he was smart, and he was a coach's son. I happened to be a basketball coach's son. His dad was the coach of the Celtics. I don't know if you're aware of that. Jimmy Rogers was his dad. And Jimmy Rogers played basketball here. That's one reason we were able to recruit Matt. But Matt was a really smart guy, and he was just like Chuck Long. If the game was down to 1 play, his pulse rate was going to go up. Oh, I don't know about that much. Just a little bit, not much. And that's what you want. You want that kind of guy taking snaps, of course, because he has to have the mindset that he's a surgeon. He has to feel comfortable with the life of the football team in his hands, much as a surgeon feels that when he's in the operating room. So that's one reason Chuck Hartley ended up being our quarterbacks, because he was ultimately the better guy. But the only way to find out was to give them all 3 some playing time.
Well, that gives us some insight as far as the process and certainly what the coaches are looking at. I did find this comment interesting from Ray, and we've heard this for years, Don. People saying we got to schedule better. He said it'd be nice to strengthen our out-of-conference schedule. No more Kent States or Colorado State. Doesn't help with Big Ten play. Bring on Power 5 opponents. My issue with that comment, Don, a couple things. They've got an extra, compared to team like the SEC, for instance, they have the extra Power 5 opponent already because they play 9 non-conference games. And am I wrong, Don? Doesn't the SEC play 8 still?
I think you're right. I think you're right. They play 12 regular season games. I believe they have 4 that are non-conference.
Yeah,
they would argue, of course, that the conference games are all difficult.
The conference games?
Yeah. And of course, we know that Vanderbilt's not difficult. That's one.
Yeah,
and there's a few others that aren't so great either.
I guess we can make that argument too. They also schedule, Abilene Christian and Campbell late in the season, which whatever. But my response to this is, I understand fans complaining about when Iowa was playing 8 conference games and your one non-conference game is Pittsburgh at home. I understand the reasoning of why we complain about that and say, well, why don't we schedule in Alabama or USC? But you've got that 9th game, Don. They've already got Iowa State on the schedule, which is a great resume building game. In fact, it's Iowa's best win on the resume this year. So they're not going to do that. And with that being said, Kent State and Colorado State both challenged Iowa. Those were not easy games.
Yeah, we actually learned something in both those games. We were tested to some degree. You're exactly right. I don't know where Kent is right now within the MAC, but I suspect they got a pretty darn good record in the MAC. Incidentally, Colorado State really messed up a game last weekend. I don't know if you ever saw it, but they were guilty of shooting themselves in the foot with the field goal situation at the end of the game, and it cost them. But anyway, that's another story. I don't have any issue. Like you say, a quality opponent every year is going to be Iowa State. So if you figure 9 Big Ten opponents plus Iowa State, that only leaves 2 spots left. And logically, first off, from a revenue standpoint, part of it's revenue. People have to understand you don't want to go home and home with too many non-conference opponents because that means you're not getting as many home games as you need. Our budget is predicated on having 7 home games. And obviously, the year we have Iowa State in Ames, we have to be sure that obviously in the conference, 9 games means you got 5 at home, 4 on the road, and then the next year it's the other way around. So obviously, if you're going to Ames, it needs to be the same year that you got 5 out of 9 conference opponents in Kinnick, so that you can at least be able to. And that requires you then to schedule 2 more people that play you not home and home, but play only at your place. Let's face it, UCLA is not going to agree to that. Nor would anybody in the Power 5 conference really wouldn't be excited about that. So you're kind of reduced to the MAC and to Conference USA and leagues like that. They're happy to take the money and play you one time only at your place. And that's part of the problem is you're not going to be able to schedule Power 5 opponents without having to go home and home. And that'll leave you with some years if you want to keep Iowa State in the mix, and certainly we want to do that because that's such a great rivalry. It means you're either going to have to sacrifice that 7th home game to schedule that home and home Power 5, or you simply continue with Conference USA and MAC opponents. That's the way I think just about everybody in the Big Ten goes.
And most fans would say, well, let's sacrifice the revenue. But that's easy to say from the outside standpoint when you're not yet seeing the effects of losing that 7th home game. That's a great point. So Colorado State's 2-2 in the Mountain West. So they were right near the top, but let me look at their schedule. So they've lost 2 straight now. They were undefeated in the Mountain West prior to blowing, and they botched. You mentioned it. They botched that end of game situation against Utah State. And then they played Boise, who is, Boise State's, I guess they're only 2-2 as well. They've kind of fallen off the map a bit. So a disappointing 2-week stretch for Colorado State. Now, Kent State is actually at the top of the MAC East division at 3-1. So those were 2 good opponents. I mean, yeah, I get they're not Power 5 opponents. They're not Alabama. They're not UCLA. But again, I think Don answered that question well. And I understand, Ray, we're grasping at straws trying to figure out, again, what went wrong. There were plenty. I mean, this was a front heavy schedule, Don. I mean, this was early on. You play Indiana, Iowa State. The offensive issues have nothing to do with the schedule.
Right. And let's not forget, too, the purpose of those MAC opponents, too, it does give you a better chance to play some backups. And I realized a lot of the key backups on offense maybe didn't get many snaps in those 2 games. But you do recall, I'm sure, that we played a lot of defensive backups that gained valuable experience against those MAC opponents.
Hyperlocal, your offense can't get any worse. What's the harm in changing QB? Well, there is harm. Don, I talked about this last year. If Spencer is your guy moving forward, and maybe he's not, but if he is, and you yank him from a game, doesn't that hurt a guy's psyche?
I'm sorry, Corey, I lost you.
Can you hear me, Don?
Yeah, you're back.
I was just saying, assuming Spencer is the guy going forward, and he may not be, but assuming he's the starter next year and maybe even the year after if he returns for an extra year. I know Iowa fans will cringe at that notion, but if that were to happen, if you yank him and say, Alex is our starter, we're going to run with Alex. I mean, I'm not saying just putting Alex in for a series. I'm talking yanking Spencer and replacing him. Doesn't that hurt a starter's psyche?
I think in most cases, yes, it does. And the obvious, talk about a leap of faith. Let's imagine you do that, and then let's imagine that Padilla lays an egg. Now what do?
Right. And they go back to the guy you've already damaged mentally, or do you have to go to your third string guy who is probably less ready? Yeah, that's the harm. And Hyperlocal asked that question. It's a valid question, but that's the harm. Springtime, he says, how much do you see Ivory Kelly-Martin at running back after his fumbling issues? There's the old slogan, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah.
And Kirk Ferentz has been patient, and maybe to his own detriment, Don. He's continued to play Ivory Kelly-Martin, who's been a good runner. I give him credit for that, but the fumbling issues aren't getting resolved, Don. They don't seem to be getting resolved. He coughed one up last week or 2 weeks ago against Purdue. It was called back because he was down. Don, can you continue to give this guy the ball if he's just going to continue to put the ball on the turf?
Let's not forget, too, I believe number 21 was out for the coin toss, too. So I don't know exactly how the captains are named, but he's clearly a leader on the team. He's clearly a good teammate and has earned the respect of his teammates and the coaches. I think it's safe to say the thing I would not do is put him in on the goal line, because I think you're putting extra pressure on him. Snaps out on the field are a different animal. And obviously, if Tyler needs a little bit of a recovery period, then I don't have any issue putting him in the game unless we're backed up to the goal line. I think we've had two of those, I believe, now, and we certainly don't want to tempt fate and have a third one. If Kelly's on the field again, I would hope it would be out on the field, not when we're backed up, and he would have a chance maybe over the next couple of weeks to demonstrate all over again that he's got good ball security. The unusual thing about that particular play, it had nothing to do with coughing the ball up because of a defensive player. It was simply an exchange problem. And it did appear, as they showed it in slow motion, it did appear, and I used to always tell our quarterbacks, if we have a problem with the center quarterback exchange, or for that matter with a handoff to a back, it's never one man's fault. We have to have the mindset, let's put our heads together and let's figure out how we can get this corrected. We're not going to point fingers at the other person. So in that regard, if I stick to my word there, it's never one player's fault. So I would hope that, and I don't doubt for a minute that Spencer would do this. Spencer would go back and analyze, is there any little thing that I could have done better on that particular play to make that a more clean exchange? I will admit it did appear that the fault lied purely with Ivory. It looked like he never really closed on the ball, as we say. You make
Don. He was looking up.
I'm okay with that. There's nothing wrong with, you don't have to look the ball in. A lot of backs are for sure taught not to look the ball in. They simply make a basket, the ball's put in the basket, and then you close the basket. So I got no issues with him looking up. That's where a running back's eye should be. He shouldn't be looking to the ball because.
So Don, did his basket close early? Did it never close, or did it never open?
It frankly never appeared to close.
Okay.
So I don't know. Obviously he was worried about penetration, maybe because Wisconsin's so effective at penetrating, and I think his normal action on that play simply didn't happen. And we do have a thing called run tracks. We spend time, and I don't know for sure that Iowa does, but I certainly suspect they do. I used to say we could blindfold the quarterback in the back, and they would still be able to make the exchanges because they know exactly where each other's going to be. And it did appear that it was a good delivery by Spencer, and the ball was out primarily because Kelly simply failed to close on the ball.
Don, I want to be respectful of your time. Can you hang out with us a few more minutes?
Yes.
Okay, Indian Joe says, I'm a Hawkeye class of 23. I don't know what that means. So does that mean he's because Iowa's only got 2 commits in the 2023 class. So I'm assuming this is not a young man who's coming to play Iowa football, because neither of their names are Joe, unless he's Ben Queter, or who's the other kid that's committed for 23, or maybe he's class of 1923. I don't know. We need an explanation on that.
I was thinking he was a student that was going to graduate from Iowa in 23.
That might be. Maybe
I don't know.
No affiliation with the athletic department. Robert White says, why is it if you make a bowl game that's considered a winning season? There's so many bowl games nowadays. Making a bowl game does not mean a thing. No, I can see that line of reasoning.
Well, frankly, I think there are too many bowl games.
I agree. Roger Edwards says, why did they hire Brian for offensive coordinator when he had no experience whatsoever? He did have experience. I mean, you can argue it wasn't, if you want to make the argument that he wasn't qualified for the OC position, that's certainly an argument you can make. The real Hayden, he made sure to turn his caps lock on for this comment to you, Don. He says, that should have happened after the bye. We saw the same crap yesterday. He's not mad at you, Don, I promise.
He says that should have happened. What's he referring to?
I don't know what he's referring to. Probably something, this comment was a few minutes ago, so I don't know what it was. But yeah, you're right. We didn't really see much difference. I didn't see much difference from Purdue to Wisconsin. Don, you had 2 weeks to prepare for the Badgers.
Well, you heard me say a week ago, it's difficult to get ready for great defensive schemes. And typically what happens is you end up with smaller lists, a smaller run list, a smaller pass list. And I think that's a good thing, because now you get to practice those plays even more and have them closer to perfection. And it gives you a better chance to win with great execution.
Hawkeye Howard says Don should start calling plays. And then Roger Edwards says Don is the man. Spaghetti Factory says Don is the Don. So people are starting to – this always – when we get to the final stretch of our show, Don, everybody starts showing you all the love.
And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay all these guys off. I appreciate the comments. You're very kind to say so.
Okay, let's see here. Question from Springtime 0502. Does Iowa not have a bruiser at running back like LaShawn? I'm assuming he means LaShawn Daniels, or a James Butler. Does it hurt the running game more? I do think they have a bruiser, and his name is Gavin Williams. Don, we saw him after Ivory Kelly Martin left. I'm surprised we haven't seen him mixed in more, but I'd have to think, Don, going back to Kelly Martin, we're going to see Gavin Williams against Northwestern, because I don't know how you continue to put Kelly Martin in these positions. Yeah,
you're probably right. I will say this. I bet you were impressed with that 17-year-old that was carrying the ball for Wisconsin.
You know what he looked like? He looked like a poor man's Derrick Henry. I mean, the guy's just huge, and he's only 17 years old. I hate to think what he's going to be in a year or two running behind that Wisconsin offensive line.
Yeah, he's a load, and frankly, nothing against the Clemson transfer, but I could see the day coming in the near future where number 0 gets more carries than the other guy.
Addison Book, Iowa should get Bob Stoops to run the offense. I don't think Bob Stoops is coming to Iowa to be an offensive coordinator. I'll say that.
Yeah, Bob Stoops himself would tell you that's a bad idea. Bobby would say.
Is Bobby more of a defensive coach, Don?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Bobby would tell you, I'm not a play caller. That's what he would tell you.
Our Buckeye fan says it's the players more than the coaches. He reviewed the game, and it was turnovers, mental errors that cost Iowa. Wisconsin's no pushover. They took advantage of what they were given. I don't agree with that. I mean, with all due respect to our Ohio State listener here, the fact of the matter is we've talked about Iowa's offensive issues. We talked about their offensive line issues in 2019, and now they're having the same offensive line issues in 2021. When you see players of different years having the same struggles, Don, that comes back to coaching. I mean, that's what it is. I don't know who's to blame specifically, but that comes back to coaching. You can't always just blame the players, correct?
Coach Fry would say, if your players are making mental mistakes, that's your fault, because you're supposed to be a better teacher than that.
Hyperlocal says Spencer Petras is bad even when he's protected. Doesn't matter if it's Colorado State or Wisconsin. He did bringing up Colorado State is probably not a good example, because Don, he did make some impressive plays against Colorado State. As I recall, he won that game primarily with his arm. So I don't know that that's a good example to bring up, but I understand Spencer has not been good, especially these last few games.
One of the things I observed from yesterday, Spencer, if he's feeling a certain amount of pressure, and pressures, of course, in a lot of forms. I'm talking about significant pass rush, game situation, that sort of thing. He does have a tendency in those situations to throw the ball high. And there were too many high passes again. Thankfully, none of them were tipped and intercepted, but they weren't able to be caught because they were simply thrown high and a little bit off target.
So many high throws, Don. So
yeah,
many.
He's just got to understand. And typically it's maybe he thinks it's tight coverage, so I got to gun the ball in there even harder. And it's no different than a major league pitcher. Sometimes when they start throwing at their extreme velocity, then a baseball tends to go high also, tends to sail. And the same thing happens to Spencer's passes sometimes. So hopefully over the long term, Spencer can realize it's all about a groove throwing motion. Professional golfers can hit a ball 300 yards. And it's not because they try to kill it every time. It's because they just hit it perfectly every time.
Right.
And the same way with passing, just have a grooved motion and deliver that motion time after time after time, and that gives you a chance to develop the kind of accuracy that you want, the kind of accuracy that so many NFL quarterbacks do have.
I'll say this, Don, and maybe you'll come back and say it wasn't a large enough sample size. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. To me, it's very clear. Alex Padilla, that's one issue he does not have. The balls he threw on Saturday were in the chest.
Good point.
So,
good point. You've heard me say many times, velocity is overrated. It's all about location, and it's a recognition of when it's okay to take something off the throw. Your goal should be to make the ball catchable as the defense allows. So if you can take something off the throw and still have the ability to put the ball on target, that's a good thing.
Don, let's think about our past 10 years or 12 years, I guess you could say, of quarterbacks at Iowa and who has actually won more and been more successful as a starting quarterback in the Big Ten. Ricky Stanzi didn't have a huge cannon of an arm, and yet you could argue you could make the argument he's been the best quarterback since Brad Banks. I think you could make that argument fairly. I mean, certainly Drew Tate may have something to say about that, and obviously CJ Beathard. But Beathard's another one. Beathard didn't have a monster arm,
right.
But guys who have had really strong arms. I think of James Vandenberg, and remember when he relieved Ricky Stanzi in 2009 in that Ohio State game. I remember a lot of drops, and I remember the commentators just mentioning how, look, this guy's got a much bigger arm than Iowa's starter, and these receivers aren't used to it. And certainly Vandenberg had other issues other than just a rocket of an arm. Obviously Spencer Petras is another example. Nate Stanley won a lot at Iowa, but I mean, Iowa didn't win the West when Nate was here, and certainly he was not as accurate with the arm. So I think you're absolutely right on that, Don. And who knows if Alex is more accurate than Spencer, but he certainly knows how to get the ball down. He seems to throw with more touch. How about the throw when the pocket did break down and he rolled out left and threw back across his body down to Sam Laporta? That was a pretty play. And like it or not, I know it's just one play. That's a play Spencer Petras would have never made. He'd have never made it because he could not have gotten out of the pocket quick enough.
Yeah, good point. Incidentally, there were a couple of players I was going to give special mention to, even if we did lose. And that was for simply refusing to slow down at all, still playing with the same enthusiasm they had throughout the game. And on offense, I'd have to pick Laporta. He was blocking his guy all over the place at the end of the game. And, of course, making some key catches, even though the game outcome was already decided. But I was impressed that he kept competing. And then defensively, if I had to single out one guy, it would have to be Kerner. It's not good when your free safety is your leading tackler, but, again, he made any number of open field tackles, and he had 11 tackles, 9 of which were unassisted tackles. So he was the usual good run stopper that he's been in other games. And Wisconsin didn't kill us with chunk plays. That one of his jobs, of course, is to prevent those big gainers. I think they had 2 plays over 20 yards, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe there was a third. But in general, we did a pretty good job at containing them. They ended up with 370 yards offense, as I recall. But you got to realize they had a lot of opportunities to move the ball because they were getting the ball back after 3 downs. In so many cases, the 4th down was a punt. And so they had a chance to win time possession, and they did. And even then, they still couldn't muster 400 yards. I think, didn't they end up with 370 maybe?
You could be right. I really didn't look. I'll tell you, I didn't look at the stat sheet longer than maybe a few seconds after the game.
You know, the more I think about it, maybe it was 270. It really wasn't that much yardage. I believe it was 270 because we actually had more passing yardage than they did. And I think we held them to maybe 100.
The defense just played it. I'm impressed by this defense every week. They didn't play great against Purdue. Certainly, I place some of that onus on Phil Parker for his game plan against David Bell. But this defense does not quit. Regardless of how much they're on the field, they do not quit, Don.
Yeah, I think you're right. I give Wisconsin credit. Think about this. This stuck in my mind. I've got it written in my notes. Let me just refer to them. Went after cornerback Harris early, too soft on coverage. The first Wisconsin drive, 8 plays, 65 yards, 3 runs, and 5 passes. Play action to the tight end on the 3rd and 1 from the 4-yard line. Those were good calls. I think Paul Chris simply was stating, we're going to try to give Iowa a curveball here. You know, they think they just got to defend the run. We're going to show them, and we're going to be smart about the passes. They were movement passes, sprint passes, if you will. They were play action passes in the other cases. Incidentally, that's one thing that still bugs me. A lot of those first down passes were not play action on our part. And I simply don't understand why we can't get more play action on early downs, because I think that would buy us a little more time in the pocket. And obviously, you might get a really good effect on linebackers and DBs if you had good play action.
Don, I'll tell you, there were several play calls in this game where I'm thinking, what the heck are we doing? The first one happened to come on the first play of the game. We come out of, first of all, we have a great return from Charlie Jones, and we come out with an empty set. Nobody in the backfield with Spencer out of the shotgun. Explain it to me, Don.
Well, the very first comment I made, excellent kick return by Charlie Jones, gives us great field position, -45 to start the game. Why go empty on first play? Because in our case, we're declaring pass. Are we going to go empty and run Q draw? I don't think so. So we're declaring that it's going to be a pass. We're inviting a pass rush. I think Spencer got fooled a little bit by who was dropping and who was rushing. The result is a 2-yard sack. He stepped up in the pocket. And we had a sack for 2.
Don, I would before you go on, I was just going to say, Don, I would never go empty with this team unless it's 3rd and long.
I agree, because I want there to always be the chance of a run. And if a running back's in the backfield with us, or even a fullback's in the backfield with us, then there's that chance that it's a run. And, of course, if the back's back there, there's a chance it's a play-action pass. So you're right. When we declare empty, who should go empty? Nebraska should go empty because they got a quarterback that's a runner.
Absolutely.
And other teams that have a quarterback that's a runner.
Penn State could go empty. Absolutely,
and they do. And they might go empty and run the ball with number 14.
Absolutely. I'd go empty with Alex. If Alex is in there, maybe go empty with Alex. But good Lord. Anyways, sorry.
Yeah.
That play came to mind as we talked about play calling. Jimmy Carter says Hayden Fry had Chuck blanking long recruit a quarterback for God's sakes. Roger Edwards is begging for a trick play. Charlie Jones running the Wildcat, a flea flicker, something. You don't have to comment on this, Don. This is just a compliment to you. BIB says, Coach P, any chance we can get you to come back and coach the offense? Always a huge fan of yours. Great man and great coach. So
thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. I tried to do the right thing at all times, and we had a lot of success, and I'm proud of the success we had.
Addison Book, the Iowa loss to Wisconsin was a rivalry trap game. I don't know that it was a trap game. I called it the biggest game of the season. They just didn't show up. Hyper local. Kirk Ferentz will never fire Brian Ferentz. And I'm assuming he meant he will not change QBs. He says he will change QBs. Well, I don't know about that. Well, I'll have to see it before I believe it, Don. Yeah. Hawkeye Howard, when Iowa's a great season, we have QBs that can run when needed to. Very true. We do have a caller here, Don. Thank you for calling Iowa at the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Yeah, this is Greg from Arizona.
Greg from Arizona. Are you a Hawkeye fan, Greg?
I am. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
So where are you at in Arizona, Greg, if you don't mind me asking?
Phoenix.
Okay. No surprises there. I'm assuming you are a snowbird, or do you live down there full time now?
No, I live here full time. I'm
All right.
wondering, we run motion to determine what the defense is. And what I really liked about the backup quarterback, you got to have a general idea where you're going with the ball. That's why they run the motion to get the defense set up. But the DS seemed to be pretty decisive on, where the openings were going to be. Wonder what Don thought about that.
Yeah, I think that is true. I thought Padilla, considering that he doesn't have a lot of playing time, he did look pretty decisive with his decision making. And it's hard to see all the receiver options, from a TV copy standpoint. But it looked to me like he made good choices. I think maybe one of those 6 attempts was into a pretty tight window. But again, I still think it might have been the best option that he had on that particular play.
But isn't that why they run the motion, to try to figure out, if they're doing man or too deep, or, that's why you're running Laporte in motion, isn't it?
Not necessarily. Since you can learn from that, but it could be check zone. It could be from one zone coverage to another based on the motion. But you're right about one thing. In general, when you move somebody through motion, you get a reaction out of the defense that gives you some indication of whether it's zone or man. Obviously, if a defender is running across the formation with the receiver, that's a good indication it's some type of man coverage.
Exactly. That's my only complaint about Petrus. He doesn't seem to, it doesn't seem to be like, I know this is where I should have the best option right out of the gate, and if that's not there, because he just seems a little indecisive in the pocket to me.
Yeah, we talked about it. You've heard me say that a really good quarterback, has to process things in a really, really rapid state. And that's hard for quarterbacks to do. And usually it improves over time. Obviously, it relates to how well they're taught. And that's why you've heard me talk about kind of equating it to baseball. Right now, we're in the World Series. Well, if there's a runner on first and there's one out, let's imagine there's a runner on first and third and there's one out. Okay, and then you're playing shortstop and a ground ball's hit to you. Well, if it's a hard ground ball, you're going to try to turn 2, right? You're going to try to get the double play to get out of the inning. And yet, if it's a softer ground ball, you better field the ball with the idea that you're going to home plate, because that runner might be breaking for home. And as soon as you realize he's not breaking for home, then you make the throw to first to get the second out. My point is, the shortstop should be thinking about that before the ball's ever even hit, preferably before the ball's even thrown. And if he gets those processes out of the way before the play starts, he's better off. Same way playing quarterback. You got to think about those things before the ball snapped, because that's going to give you a chance to be a more decisive thinker after the snap.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. He's got to know, this is when you go up to the line of scrimmage and you see the defense, you have to have an idea. And if you got some guy in motion, like you said, if they're tracking him across the field, it's man to man. You got to know, this is my best option. If that's not open, you can make your progressions. But seems to me he doesn't really seem to.
And it doesn't even
those decisions quickly. But
it doesn't even have to involve motion.
Anyway, that's my comment.
I was just going to say, I gave an example from the previous week's game, and I think you remember Corey me talking about it. There's a thing called a pre-snap read too. If you got simple out routes called, well, if one guy's pressed and one guy's soft, don't throw the fade route unless you need a big play, because that fade route may not be open. Just to have a good play, throw the out route against the soft corner. And there was a play early in that game where Spencer didn't do that. So it does make me wonder what's wrong with his pre-snap judgment, because he's got to be able to make that decision. Should be an easy choice. I got a soft corner on one side and a press corner on the other, I'm going to take the easy throw. I'm going to take the throw that's 90% completion because that's going to give me second and short.
Exactly. That was my only complaint is it doesn't look like he doesn't look like he knows this is going to be like, I think Purdue, they lined up Bell on one, the guy knew he's one-on-one.
Right.
On the right side. It's like, this is where I'm going. I don't care what's happening. But it doesn't look like Petrus knows, looks like my best option and then progress from there if it's not open. But that's why it seems like he's getting sacked a lot because he doesn't make a quick decision,
Yeah, you're right.
It seemed like he was pretty decisive in that. But
yeah, and part of that responsibility for the coaching staff, or specifically the quarterback coach, you want to be sure that the quarterback understands the progression on each and every play. And when I say progression, it means here's your first choice as a receiver, here's your second, here's your third. And obviously, if you're dealing with an inexperienced quarterback, maybe you try to come up with more pass plays that are simply a case of either or. Here's the first choice, here's the second. Maybe you don't even want them to get to the third or fourth choice because you're going to run out of time, or maybe it's going to be too much for them at that point in their career. So you load them up mentally as only as much as what they can handle. And if they can't handle very much, maybe that's an indication you got the wrong guy playing quarterback.
But when you come up to the line of scrimmage, you got to have a general idea, here's what we're running. Don't you think? I know this is going to be my best option, whether it's the right side with two receivers or you got man-to-man on the left. This doesn't seem like he recognizes, where his best option is right out of the gate.
I understand what you're saying. I've seen that same thing. It looks like sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about who deserves the ball the most.
Right, exactly. Where your best matchup is, really.
Yeah.
Thanks, Don. I think,
you bet.
You're a great guy.
One of the comments.
Feeling better after your surgery and everything. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. One of the things I observed.
Thank you.
One of the things, Corey, early in the game, I made a note. We got to be careful not to outsmart ourselves sometimes. And here's what I mean by that. We put a tight end or a running back or a fullback into a traditional wide receiver position, and then we threw the ball to them. There were a couple of early examples of that. We threw an out route to number 84 when he was split as a receiver. He was going against a corner, and the corner had really good coverage on him, and it fell incomplete. We threw a slant one time to Tyler that was pretty well covered with an inside fence post. I think Spencer recognized the threat inside and threw the ball purposely threw it a little bit behind Goodson, and Goodson couldn't quite control that ball either. Those both happened early in the game. So my only point about that is be careful. It might look good on paper that you're an empty now and you got a running back lined up as an outside receiver. And Tyler's got good hands, but I don't know how many slant routes he's run. And in that case, it was a slant route that was thrown specifically a little bit outside of his path, and that made it a more difficult catch. He wasn't quite able to control it.
Sam Gonzalez says, Deuce Hogan, please. He's the third string quarterback. You're not going to see Deuce barring some major injury. I mean, I know everybody loves Deuce. I don't know. I'm not sure why besides just recruiting hype, Don.
I'm smiling. The most popular guy on campus is always the backup quarterback. And maybe in the case of Sam, it's the third team quarterback. So I guess it reminds me of that old joke, I want to go with Deuce Hogan. He hadn't thrown an interception the entire season. Well, that's right. The bad news. He hadn't thrown a pass either.
Before we get to our next caller here, Don, quick question I wanted to address. Have you ever seen a coordinator get after another coordinator, i.e. Parker getting angry at Brian Ferentz for his team's effort in play calling? Have you ever seen that, at least on your staff, any of your staffs?
No, and it's simply because I think the coordinator on the other side of the ball understands I know what my job is. My job is not to berate the coordinator on the other side of the ball. My job is to be as good as I can with my responsibility in the game. And a prime example, and this is, I know for a fact, the way our defensive players think about it. They think of themselves as being like the fire department. Okay, you get a call, there's a fire. I got to go put it out. It might be on the +2 yard line. I still got to put it out. And maybe it's unrealistic that you put it out, but maybe at least you have the equivalent of saving lives. You make them kick a field goal, or maybe you block the field goal. Maybe they miss the field goal. But the point is, you don't give up a touchdown. So our defensive players understand, and certainly Phil Parker understands. My job is to defend that end zone. My job is not to second guess what the other side of the ball is doing, because the game is much too complicated for that. All of my time and energy has got to be spent on trying to solve the opposing offense. Those are the ones I have to work against, and I'm not going to be concerned with what the other side of the ball does on my bench, because we've got very competent people handling those responsibilities, and I don't know enough to even comment about it, because I know this. Our offense is struggling against Wisconsin, but I also recognize Wisconsin has a damn good defense, and that's part of our problem.
Absolutely. We do have a phone call here for you, Don. Thank you for calling Iowa at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Corey, this is Vincent.
Hey, Vincent. How are you tonight?
Not too bad. Just got done doing some trick-or-treating, but I told you last night if I got a chance, I'd call in. First
Absolutely.
off, I did not get a chance to watch the games you had referenced from the 19 season to look at the line, but I will. But a couple things for you guys, and if you could both maybe elaborate on it. And Don, how we doing? Just to say hi. As far as the offensive play calling and the execution, or I guess let me reverse that. Do you guys feel it's more of an execution issue with the Iowa offense, or is it more of a play calling, or is it a combination of both?
I would say it's a combination. That brings up a good point. I used to always remind our guys, and there were times for sure when I understood the players have great confidence in our ability to put together a plan and our ability to call great plays at the right time. But I reminded them even then, it might be a really good play call, but it's still going to require execution. And the standard phrase was, there are no magic calls. None of these calls are guaranteed to work. They all require execution. So please understand, we're going to do the best we can to put you in the best possible place, but we're still going to be unsuccessful without great execution on your part.
Yeah. Corey, your thoughts?
I mean, I would agree with Coach. I think it's obviously, I've been complaining about play calling, honestly, since Brian took over. It's been inconsistent. It's been sporadically good at times. But if you look at the norm has been subpar, in my opinion. Perfect example is that, first play of the game coming out in an empty set. I don't know what Brian is thinking in that situation. And obviously it's a difference in opinions, and maybe I'm wrong. I know Don agrees on that play, but to me, it's a combination, because the offensive line, we've talked about this. Don brought it up on a show a few weeks ago. The offensive line's even having some issues with technique, and that's a concern. This is not only strength related. They're having some issues with technique, and I believe, Don, you brought up Kyler Schott has had some struggles from what you've seen. Of course, he's working back from an injury, but man, we're 7 games into the season, 8 weeks into the season. So I think it's a combination, caller. I will say this. Somebody made a comment about how Iowa's offensive line hasn't been good since 2015. There is one variable present since that year, 2015. I guess I'll let our callers and our listeners figure out what that one variable is, but there was a change, I believe, after that 15 season. And since then, I would agree that the offensive line has not been great.
Ooh, that's since 15. I'll have to think about that one. You got me curious.
Yeah, and they've had some. The thing about it here, caller, is they've had some really good offensive linemen. Alaric Jackson's in the league. Obviously, Tristan Wirfs is in the league. They've had guys who have. Austin Blythe. I think maybe he graduated. Maybe he graduated in 15. But they've had guys who are now playing at the next level. But man, this has not been great. And again, I brought up 2019. One of our commenters earlier brought up 2017, and I'd have to look back. Last year was sort of an anomaly because it was, I don't want to just say it's because it was a COVID year, but they did run the ball really well last year. Pass protection wasn't always great. So I don't know how to account for that, but last year was kind of different. Certainly if last year was poor, we could look at the sample size and say, man, every year since 2015, they've been under average, below average. But I don't know. Certainly there is something to be said for their performance every year since 2015.
Well, the two things, I guess, guys, that stick out for me with the line are two correctable things. You look at, obviously it's the execution, but then the technique, and you can kind of see it as you're watching the plays unfold. Guys getting beat by using poor technique, or there's poor execution on a zone blocking play. Two things that are correctable, and I'm sure the coaching staff is doing what they can to correct those things. But those are the two outliers that I see fairly frequently when watching our line play, and it's both run blocking and pass blocking.
And Vincent, let's remember something. And I know this is sort of a ridiculous comment to make, but it's absolutely true. If you look at Iowa over the last 23 years, Iowa very rarely runs the ball well. They just, by the numbers, they are not a good running team. And yet there's this feeling around the Iowa program that, boy, we're just going to pound the ball. We're like Wisconsin. We're not like Wisconsin at all. We very rarely run the ball effectively.
Well, one thing I'd like to see us do more, I think we could be more effective with, is getting Goodson on the outside. Seal a corner, do more outside run plays, do two tight ends to one side, or, have your line set up to where you're giving him an opportunity to get to the outside and use his speed. Do you guys see any of that being more effective as well, or is that just me looking at it as a viewer?
Don, what do you think?
Well, we try to get the ball outside, but you got to realize, I think I mentioned outside zone a while back, one particular game. It seemed like we did a good job of getting the ball outside to a tight end formation or a tight end wing formation, but not so much to a split side. So I think it just ties back into the fact that those tackles are not great players. If the tackle's the widest guy in the formation, when I say in the formation, I mean there's no tight end there. Obviously, there might be a split receiver or two even. But if the widest guy connected to the offensive line is an offensive tackle, there is no tight end. That tackle's block is key, because if he doesn't reach the guy, then obviously we're not going to be able to get outside of with the ball, and we're going to have to run up inside somewhere, and that's where the pursuit of the linebackers can get you, of course. So that's part of our problem, is we don't have tackles that can consistently reach what we call a five technique, an outside defender, a defender that's sitting on their outside shoulder. We're not quite a combination of quickness and speed and strength enough so that we can get those guys reached. And we try, and that means at some point the runner's got to turn back inside, and that's where the pursuit can oftentimes contain us and prevent us from gaining any kind of significant yardage.
Okay. My next question, Don, is kind of a loaded one, because I know you've been in the coaching profession for many, many years. Watching the last two games, and I was asking Corey this yesterday, with watching the last two games, what is it that you would have changed, or what is it that you would have implemented? What would you have done or do to fix the problems that they're having? And if it's too loaded of a question, I get it, but if you want to
talking strictly on offense, or you're talking defense too?
No, just our defense, I think, is playing pretty well. So yes, sir, just the offense.
Well, I would disagree with you when I talk about the Purdue game, because defensively we couldn't get off the field. And the simple answer there is I would have put a lot of roll coverage against David Bell. We gave him way too much single coverage. And so part of our problem against Purdue is that we couldn't get off the field on defense and couldn't stay on the field on offense. It was really a problem on both sides of the ball. Looking specifically at Wisconsin, I would have taken more shots. I would have recognized it's going to be hard to sustain drives on these guys. It's going to be hard to string 4 first downs together. And 4 first downs, of course, might cover 60 yards. But against a team like Wisconsin that grudgingly gives up yardage, 4 first downs may only move you 50 yards or 45 yards. Maybe it's all you can do to get that necessary 10 yards on 3 downs before you have to make that hard decision on 4th down. So I would have simply taken more shots. It's that old adage, you can't steal second with your foot on first. Well, let's be more aggressive and let's take some shots. And, if you're trying to steal second base, maybe it's a breaking ball and the runner has a good jump and he's able to get in there underneath the great tag from the catcher. Sometimes the catcher makes a bad throw. Maybe you were going to be thrown out, except he didn't make a good throw to second base. So the point is, once you steal second, now a single gets you in, rather than being stuck on third base if you fail to steal second. A single might not even get you to third base. Maybe you have to hold up at second. But the fact that you stole second base sets you up for a chance to score on any kind of hit to the outfield. Maybe this baseball analogy doesn't hold, but I just thought maybe that's another way to explain it.
No, I was thinking the same thing. A couple different things. When we have defenses that are playing a man coverage, we got guys on the outside, albeit young. But you look at Johnson, you look at even Bruce, Charlie Jones. We got some guys that can beat, man coverage and get behind their defender. And we should be taking those shots downfield, at least to give the defense, the notion that, hey, we're going to try this. We're going to do this. So just creeping everybody up to the box, trying to stack the box, knowing that we're not really a prolific passing team. It really puts us in the bind as it is. But yeah, I agree. Taking some shots downfield, multiple shots, using our screen game more. I don't know if Brian has a real prolific screen game, but, doing things to not allow, for one, get the ball to Petrus's hand faster, but 2, catch an aggressive defense, because it seems like we're always facing aggressive defenses because they know if they put pressure on Petrus, he's either going to fall down or they're going to get to him. So getting the ball out of Petrus's hand fast with some screen or with a screen game. Also, when you have guys that are playing off coverage on the outside, get the ball to them quick, let them make a quick move, maybe get by a defender. There's just lots of things you look at from an offensive standpoint. You're thinking, man, you can attack in so many places, but we don't do a whole heck of a lot of it, which leads me back to that question. Is it Brian not having confidence in the guys to execute the play, or is it just crappy play calling?
Well, here's what I'll say, Vincent, real quick, and then I'll let Don chime in on that question. We're talking about how they need to take shots. Here's my thinking, and maybe I'm being negative Nancy, Don, and if I am, you can correct me. But if Iowa didn't take shots against Wisconsin, when all of the analytics said you needed to take shots early and win the first quarter and break tendency, if you're not going to do that against Wisconsin, they're not going to do that against Northwestern, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska. Now, I could be wrong, but to me, this past game was the perfect game where you needed to take those shots against that 3-4 front, and they didn't do it. Don, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I do. Let's talk about the 3 games that Wisconsin has lost this year. 2 of those 3 games, one big reason that Penn State won and one reason that Michigan won is because they did take shots and they did connect on them. Each of those teams had 3 super explosive plays. I'm talking about plays that are 30 yards or more. In the case of both teams, I think they had plays, maybe one that was 30-something, one that was 40-something, and one that was 50-something, all in the same game. Those shots that they took, now, ironically, they took them in the 4th quarter of both those games, but they were the difference in the game. If Wisconsin had an Achilles heel, it was their ability to defend against deep passes, based on the Michigan game, based on the Penn State game. That's a true statement.
Oh, absolutely. Corey, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with, hey, if we haven't done it by this time, we're not going to. And Don, same thing with you. This was a good game to attack, because these aren't proven corners, not that I've seen thus far. And the mere fact that we didn't do it just kind of tells me that it's either lack of confidence in the player, or it's the Brian, lack of confidence in Brian and himself, I guess.
And maybe. Vincent, let me interrupt you again. Let's remember.
Sure.
You're absolutely right. The corners are supposedly the weak spot of this Wisconsin defense. And let's also remember Purdue was down at least one or two of their starting cornerbacks in that Iowa game, and Iowa still was not able to take advantage of it, or didn't try enough.
Go ahead.
Another thought about deep passes. People always talk about, if they want to look at it from a negative standpoint, they always recognize, it's hard to have a good completion percentage when you're throwing the ball deep. And there's some truth to that, of course. But here's what gets lost in the shuffle sometimes. There is a thing called DPI also, defensive pass interference. And oftentimes the receiver doesn't come down with the ball, but the defensive back kind of panics at the last moment and interferes with him anyway. So in the end, he didn't even have to catch the ball. Now, that's only 15 yards, but let's face it, 15 yards gives you another set of downs and obviously changes field position. So that's another thing that can happen from a positive standpoint. It's not completed, but oftentimes there is pass interference on the part of the defense.
Not only that, but when you're throwing those deep passes, Don, I'm an offensive-minded guy. If I'm throwing a deep shot and I have it's a call that's or sent in, or it's a call I know is going in. Excuse me. If I know that my receiver is going to be running a go route, and I can even have it set up to where I say, "Hey, Keegan, as you're going, I want you to take off on a go route, just as if you're going as deep as you can, as far as you can." But actually, what we're going to do is we're going to throw it short on purpose, and either it's going to cause a DB to have a PI infraction, or you're going to get separation as the DB still runs by you, and you're still going to get a 20, 25-yard, 35-yard completion. These are things you can implement in your offense to take advantage of weak secondaries. Again, just another thing that we can do, or I can do that.
Yeah, just to set the record straight, we don't have that discussion before the ball snapped. We simply react to the situation as it plays. Simple example: if that defender does cover you deep down the field, that's what we call a back shoulder fade. We purposely throw the ball. We purposely underthrow the ball. Our guy reacts to it. The defender, who's maybe on the same yard line as our receiver, tends to run on down the field, of course, because he thinks he has to defend over the top. And obviously the first set of eyeballs that goes to the ball is the receivers. So the receiver has the advantage there. The ball's purposely thrown short. Receiver puts on his brakes. But we don't just decide that before the snap. We just simply react to the way the defender's playing.
Correct. I mean, what I'm saying is, we, as a quarterback and as a receiver, these guys are going to know, hey, depending on what you're seeing from if it's man, off, or zone, at least knowing that play call is there. And if you have the correct coverage to run that route, this is the same page we're going to be on.
Yeah, the bottom line, regardless of how that corner plays, we have a chance to complete the ball. If he's lagging behind, we're going to throw it up and over. If he's on the same yard line as we are, if he's right there on our hip, we may throw it short and inside, or even short and outside. But in either case, our guy's going to put on his brakes before the defender does.
Yep.
Hope that makes sense.
I always tell – oh, absolutely, Don. I always tell the kids I coach, I do a lot of the skill position players, the biggest advantage you have from your position on offense is what you're doing, the defense does not.
Right.
You have to go into each route, each play, knowing I'm going to have the advantage because I know where I'm going, the defender doesn't. So make sure you have crisp breaks in your routes or cuts in your routes. These are things I just don't see from Iowa that seem kind of elementary. But anyway, I could probably go on all night with that. Guys, I won't keep you. Corey, I always appreciate you taking the call. Love listening to you guys. Don, same thing. Appreciate you taking the questions and spending the time with us fans. So, guys, greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Vincent. Have a great night. We'll talk to you next week, hopefully.
Corey, you too. Don as well. You guys have a good night. Happy Halloween.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Appreciate the call and appreciate the donation, the super sticker from BIB. Always appreciate the kindness from him and all of our listeners this evening. But again, appreciate the super sticker there. Don, I want to wrap this up. I've kept you way too long. It seems like we get a plethora of calls late in the show, which is, I guess, par for the course. And maybe people are winding down and starting to try to take their mind off their week ahead. I don't know, their work week ahead. They're on a Sunday night. So anything else, Don, to add on Wisconsin. Obviously, we didn't really take a lot of time to break down Northwestern. You and I both feel pretty good, I think, about Iowa's chances in that game. But what does Iowa need to do to avoid what would be a catastrophic loss to a bad Northwestern team?
Well, we just have to show up. Frankly, we're disappointed with the last two games, the way they played out. We need to show up with a chip on our shoulder. We need to show up in a foul mood, and we need to take out our frustrations on Northwestern. I can think of any number of games through the years where we were able to do that. A prime example, back in '85, we lost over at Ohio State when we were number 1 ranked. The next week, we played a really good Illinois team. The score at half was 49-0, and at the end of the game, it was 59-0, and we played everybody we had. So the point was, we were in an angry mood, and we were frustrated that we'd underachieved, and we wanted to take out our frustrations on the next opponent. It happened to be Illinois. It wouldn't shock me at all if we show up with that mindset that we know we're better than what we've shown, and we're gonna demonstrate that Saturday night against Northwestern.
Don, appreciate the time this evening, and I apologize to some of our commenters who we didn't get around to answering their questions. There were a few. One comment that I do want to at least give a moment to, we had I don't remember who it was, but a user that brought up the fact that, and this is according to him, I haven't went back and looked at this research, but what this commenter said was that Iowa over the past 5 years has lost 4 of their 5 games coming out of a bye week. If that's the truth, Don, shame on these coaches. That's my statement. Maybe you disagree, Don, but if
I don't think that's true. The only reason I say that, I read somewhere where we were, I think, 2-2 after our last 4 byes. I could be wrong about that, but one of the writers had mentioned we were 2 wins and 2 losses over that last 4 years.
Oh, that's still, so you're before this game or after yesterday's game?
That was before, I think. I think we were 2
even if that's the case, Don, that means
now we're 2-3, and that's
3 losses out of 5.
You're right. My guess is it would be interesting to see nationwide what happens to teams after a bye. And of course, the tricky part of that is, well, if you're playing Alabama, you probably lose after a bye. And if you're playing Vanderbilt, you probably win. So, but still, if you're looking at a big enough sample, it should be some kind of indicator that it pays to have that off week. I think my guess is nationwide, if you looked at enough games, it would probably show maybe as high as 55 or 60% win after a bye. And we haven't backed that up.
Don, Purdue sure looked good after their bye.
They looked energized, and they looked like they had one hell of a good game plan too.
Boy, did they. All right. As always, want to run through a couple of housekeeping items before we leave. Want to remind everybody, every Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. Central Time, the voice of college football, Mark Rogers, and myself will be live here on this channel, Iowa Football, at the voice of college football, taking your questions, your chats, and talking Iowa versus Northwestern. Also, if you want to help us out, help out the channel, donate to the voice of college football, look down at the description below this video. And if you do donate through one of the means below, please make a note as you're going through this donation process that it is for the Iowa channel. That way the funds can be directed to the right spot. Iowa Basketball Live post-game shows. I continue to ask this question every week. We've had some good response. Iowa Basketball is less than a week away. Their first exhibition, I believe, is on Friday. So again, please continue to give us your response. We're working on putting this together. This will be over at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. You can look at my backdrop. From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do that. From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. And as you can see on the bottom ticker, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, our podcast available through all your major platforms. And of course, we want to thank Mark Rogers at the Voice of College Football for helping make this possible. And one final thing, Don, and I talked about this briefly yesterday. I do want to take a moment to send a shout out to a good friend of mine who suffered a massive stroke a little over a week ago and is currently in the Iowa City hospitals. Matt Spitzley is his name. He is dealing with a whole lot. He had hemorrhaging on his brain. He actually lives here in Ames. I've worked with the guy for years. A family man, father of 4, and he is he's in a very precarious situation, as you probably well know, Don. When you suffer a large stroke, right now he's actually stable, but obviously the risk of suffering another one is very high, which would be extremely life-threatening. So if anybody wants to help Matt and his family out, please reach out to us. You can, and I'll go ahead and put this email. Actually, what I'll do is I'll put our website here. Go to our website, storycounty.news. All right, that's the URL. If you're interested in helping Matt and his family, you go to the homepage at storycounty.news, and a couple stories down, you'll see a feature story that I wrote actually on Matt and this situation. And in that article, there's a link to donate to his GoFundMe. So, he's a great guy, and it's a great cause. I figured I'd take a moment to recognize him. And again, any help for Matt and his family is much appreciated during a very difficult time. Don, thank you as always. And let's hope we're talking about a win next week against Northwestern.
Corey, let me just address one thing with you before we sign off. Let's just discuss post-game show after Northwestern. I just want you to be aware, I'm assuming you'd like to go right after the game ends. And just like for Maryland, I'd be happy to make myself available. I'm not going to be traveling to or from Evanston, so I'm certainly available immediately after the game. I'm assuming that's what you'd like to do.
Yes, and in fact, I'm glad you said that because, as you know, I try to make sure we have the time and date available for our listeners who may not be aware. Let me paste this up here real quick. It was announced early this morning, kind of an odd time to announce a starting game time, but it was announced by the University of Iowa that it will be a 6 p.m. game, which for the sake of our post-game show, Don, I'm glad it wasn't 7 because they said it was either going to be 6, 6:30, or 7. So let's just be happy it was at 6. I know you're a night owl, Don, but maybe
Right.
Some of our listeners are not. I know that after the Maryland game, I don't know if you know this, Don. Do you know how long I was on taking calls after the Maryland game?
I believe you said another 2.5 hours after we got off.
Jeez. That is ridiculous. Isn't that is that as obscene as the Iowa offense, Don?
What were these? A lot of West Coast callers, maybe? Is that why you were on so late?
I had a guy call in, Don, from Texas. He said, I'm an Iowa fan. And then there was a long pause, and I said, what are you doing up at 2 a.m.? And he's like, I'm listening to you. I'm like, all right, I appreciate it. It was after 2 a.m., Don.
And that was on a Friday night. So I guess Friday night's slow in Texas.
Friday nights are slow in Texas. They were slow here. So, and obviously that was a great, that might be, obviously we were excited after the Penn State game, but man, that Maryland game was fun looking back, especially given what we've seen these last couple of games. So yes, we will be here after the Northwestern game, which, as you can see from our banner, Saturday, November 6th. So we're just a couple hours away from November, Don. November 6th, 6 p.m. on BTN. So we'll be here, I guess I have to do the math, so approximately 9:30 or so. And, of course, no delay because this is a road game. So, Don, did you consider going to this game, being that it's in Chicago?
Not really. I'll tell you why. I've had an invitation to go to the game, but I begged off. And the reasons are simply because we have to babysit the grand dog. So our daughter's going to be doing some traveling, and that means we're going to have our grandchild, our grand dog.
Awesome.
So I'll be tied up for the weekend, letting the dog out.
And so your lovely wife will be taking care of the dog during our show, I'm assuming.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. We can give Don a couple moments of a break throughout our show next week. All right, Don. Again, appreciate the time, and we've went well over what you've allotted for this. So thank you for everyone listening this evening. For Don Patterson, I'm Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm in Iowa at the Voice of College Football. We'll talk to you soon.